Good morning, everyone. Okay. Excuse me. Hello. We're getting going now. Everybody take your seats, please. Thank you. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4 to 6 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 150 days of receipt of the application of zoning and 210 days for an official plan amendment. A comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments. And we have quite a few motions that mostly Vice Chair Tierney will be moving, but if anyone else has another motion on any of the items listed today, if you can give it to us in advance, that's really good for the benefit of the people that came out to speak, but also for your council colleagues. Okay. Any declarations of interest? I just wanted to say that I heard from both Councillor Moffat and Councillor Blade that they are in traffic and they were hoping to be 10 minutes late, but we'll see about that. And I also wanted to express our real best wishes to our colleague, Councillor Jeff Leeper, who I'm sure that you all heard suffered a heart attack yesterday and is in the Heart Institute here in Ottawa, which is the best heart institute in the world. I hear his spirits are, as they always are, chipper, and he'll be back with us in good time. Confirmation of minutes from January 24th meeting, 2019. Have you carried? Okay, the first item we'll be holding, it's the Ottawa Next Beyond 2036. Second item we'll be holding, it's the site plan control process and fees review. In just a minute, I've got an updated list. I'm just going to have a look at it. Okay. I have two people who are in agreement with it. I have David Renfro and Kelly Rodenizer. Are you both here? Mm-hmm. Okay. If the committee is prepared to carry this, the site plan process and fees review, do you still need to speak?
I do not, Madam Chair.
Kelly?
I do not either.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions on? Is it just one question? Because I don't really need to hold it all if it's just for that. So we have a technical amendment as well. So you can ask your question right now.
The question on the site plan control process and fees was around the consultation process. In the very last page around the summary, there's a question around, or there's a statement around staff may not be available for public consultations that are asked for by a councillor. I wanted you to clarify what that means. What circumstances would staff not be available? I'm also curious if there would be in the future any thought of charging councillors for staff to attend those meetings. This is what I'm concerned about. I want to make sure we have clarity on what the intentions are as part of that.
Are you offering that?
I'm certainly not offering that. Absolutely.
Sometimes
not.
We do that.
Do we?
Yes.
Anyhow, if you could clarify that, because certainly, going door to door, I don't think we heard from anyone that they would want less consultation. I want to make sure that what we are supporting today would not limit public consultation as part of this process in any way.
Thank you. Madam Chair, to answer that question, the intent of this program is to be able to actually, we're increasing the transparency around the consultation. So currently right now, some of our standard site plan applications are not on our DevApp site. So with this new program, we're actually going to be adding all of those to the DevApp site with a link for the staff to be able to receive comments from the community. With respect to your question around the public consultation, we are trying to manage a limited staff resource pool, and our applications continue to rise. is. So you can just sort of picture the graph that we would have. We have a gap. So our focus is really on trying to make sure that we have staff available to deal with those types of applications that may be more complex and are really generating that community concern. So the notion in that comment was really, if it's a standard application, we aren't expecting to do public consultation for all of them. We really want to focus on those that have the community concern with the complex. And at any point in time, the councillor's office does want to run a public consultation. You're absolutely more than encouraged to do so.
Under what circumstances would you? Is it all? Is it some? It's just not clear from the report.
Okay, so perhaps we have two choices. You can have this conversation, the rest of it, because I think she's answered it to the best of her ability. We can hold the item till after we do other things. I will tell you that one of the reasons is, and Ms. Snedden told me this, our applications in January are up 91%. We are the only municipality that does what we do with site plans. This is not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It is about doing it better and managing it better and being able to provide services so that people like the FCA, and I see Sheila Perry here in the audience, who are rigorous in their review of all applications across the city, can actually find information on site plans that they're not having access to too. So it's actually probably consulting in a more efficient way, for sure, but being able to manage the ones that are absolutely of critical importance. Did I say good? Yeah.
Well, if I can follow up offline then with Ms. Snedden about circumstances around the discretionary, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Good question. To both of you, are you still happy if we carry this on content? Both Mr. Renfro and Ms. Rodenizer? Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks very much. On the technical amendments?
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Therefore, be resolved that recommendation 2 be amended to read as follows. 2, amendments to the fees of the planning application for the planning applications bylaw 2017-18 as outlined in document 2 now be included in the 2019 draft budget.
So that's adding it to the budget. Okay? Carried?
Carried.
Thank you. On the item as amended? Carried? Carried. Thanks very much. Okay, item number 3, we're holding that. We have speakers. That's the draft operating and capital budget for Planning Committee for 2019. The next item is 2280 City Park Drive. That's a zoning bylaw amendment in Vice Chair Tierney's ward. Does anyone on the committee have any questions? I have one speaker, and it's Paul Black from FOTEN. Paul, are you here? Okay. If we're prepared to carry this item, do you need to speak? Thank you. Is the item carried? Carried. Thank you. The next item is 301 Palladium Drive. That's in Councillor Hubley's ward. I don't have anybody registered at all to speak on this one. It's a zoning bylaw amendment. Does anyone have any questions? No? Is the item carried? Carried. Thank you. The next one is the City of Ottawa zoning bylaw 250 omnibus amendments Q1 2019. I have. Does anyone have any questions? There was, I think it was very well described, by the way, in the pages and pages itemized. No, Hugo, you're here. I think I saw you. Hugo Lalone is with Minto. You say that you need to speak if needed. Do you need to? No. Okay, so is this item carried? Thank you. The next item, number 7, is the official plan amendment, the 180 appeal settlement, Canada West. We have a motion from Councillor Gower. You know what, when you think about it, I always call you the right name, but when I get here and I look at Scott Moffat's name, I'm thinking like, anyway, Gower. Yeah, but yeah, let's put that on the table because I do have somebody to speak if necessary. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can read the motion. A bit of a preamble. Had a lot of interest from residents on this due to an administrative error in how the report was written. So this is an amendment to correct that before it would rise to council. The motion states that whereas the report title Official Plan Amendment 180 Appeal Settlement Canada West states that Councillor Gower is aware of the report and has provided no comments, and whereas the aforementioned statement was an administrative error, as Councillor Gower was actually not aware of the report before publication as part of the Planning Committee agenda, and whereas Councillor Gower has subsequently been briefed by Policy, Legal, Planning, and Recreation Planning staff on the report, therefore be it resolved that Planning Committee approve the report section titled Comments by Ward Councillor be amended prior to rising to Council to reflect Councillor Gower's comments as follows. You ready? All right. I support this recommendation. All recreation amenities originally considered for the district park will be accommodated in the reconfigured space. Co-locating with the future high school aligns with current best practices for suburban design and will eliminate the need for a separate parking lot and situate the district park closer to a future transit hub. Additional recreation space will be available to the community through a local park in informal areas along Feedmill Creek, and a future stormwater management pond will create additional natural areas.
And you are going to be so proud of this when you see it all built, because we have an example from many, many years ago before amalgamation in the PN when Mother Teresa High School opened. It was Jack Sterling, Jack's over there, who was the Deputy City Manager of Planning and Parks and Public Works, came up with a brilliant idea to share the space differently. So it took less space. Remember, Rick? Less space for Mother Teresa. We have a 32-acre Ken Ross Park now, and it's an amazing complex. Benefits everybody. So thank you very much for that catch. So on the amendment, is that carried? And so Peter, did you want to speak? Peter Hume is here if you needed to. No? Good. On the item as amended? Carried? Okay, then we have the settlement of Appeal 2 to Official Plan Amendment 180. Do I have any motions on this one? No. I have Greg Winters from Novatech. Anyone else have any questions around the table? Do we need to hold it? Greg, where are you? Oh, hi. Do you need to speak if we're prepared to carry it? Okay. So is this item carried? Carried. Thank you. The next one is it's a Councillor Kavanagh motion. We had a notice of motion, direction to staff to initiate a rezoning of 975 Woodruff Avenue, and Councillor Leeper was to move it, but Vice Chair Tierney is going to move it. Do you want to hold it, or do you want to? Oh, you don't mind, do you? Okay. Yeah. So Councillor Shirelli is going to move it. Pretty much guarantees you a win with that many votes. Yeah. So Councillor Shirelli, he'll pass it over to you.
Wrong motion. Yeah, he's just going through the motions here.
Yeah, I mean, how about right here? Is it not up? I think it's up.
The left side. It's Valentine's Day.
Okay. Yeah, technically, okay. You got it? Okay. Okay, so we have, so it's item number 9, that Planning Committee directs staff to initiate rezoning for 975 Woodruff Avenue to remove rooming house as a permitted use on the site.
Yep. Good catch, Councillor Kavanagh.
Yeah.
It was really good for being proactive. Anyone,
we went through the R4 zoning review, and part of that was to eliminate this kind of thing popping up. And this did pop up partway through the process. And I think committee wanted to fix that.
Mr. Willis?
Madam Chair, just to answer Councillor Chiarelli's comment, this application preceded Council's adoption of the new R4 bylaw. That's why it got through. If it had come in a little later, it would have been captured by the bylaw and would not be permitted today.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time on trying to prevent this.
Yeah.
Councillor Kavanagh, good? So is item carried? Thank you.
Thanks.
Item number 10, appointments to urban and suburban panels of the Committee of Adjustment. We're going to defer that one till the next meeting, and Vice Chair Tierney is going to
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Be it resolved that this report be deferred to the next Planning Committee meeting of February 28th, 2019.
Okay. Is everyone okay with that? It would have been moved by Councillor Moffat, who was instrumental on the sponsorship panel, but their 10 minutes has morphed into 20 now. Ottawa traffic. Yeah. Okay, so Murray, you don't need to speak to deferral? Okay. Thank you very much. So on the item, is it deferred? Carried? Okay, we have next number 11, appointments to the Built Heritage Subcommittee. I have no speakers. Is that carried? Councillor Gower? Number 12, we have the Built Heritage Subcommittee terms of reference. No speakers on that. A lot of work has gone into that, though, over the last couple of years, certainly. And a lot of public consultation with the members of the heritage community and under the leadership of Court Curry. Are you here, Court, still? Yeah. And a job well done, I think. And now you've inherited this, and are you comfortable with it? Okay, so on this item, is it carried? Thank you. And on the Planning Committee terms of reference, I have no speakers again. Changes are mostly related, if not fully related, to the changes at Built Heritage and how less of the items will need to come through Planning Committee as well. So no questions on that? Carried? Thank you. Yep. And so we have a motion to add an additional item. Vice Chair Tierney.
Great. So first of all, on the suspension, therefore be resolved that the following motion be added to the Planning Committee agenda of February 14th, 2019, pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the Rules of Procedure.
Carried. And now I'm going to ask, once you read that, I'm going to ask Mr. Rose just to make a comment on it.
Everyone get
this is on the modification to OPA 180. You want it?
Therefore, it be resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that Council endorse the rewording of the modification 2 of the official plan amendment 180 as follows.
Sorry.
2, the city consider the removal of the land from the agricultural resource area designation to allow the urban expansion of the demonstrated through the comprehensive review undertaken of the city and addressing the matters required by the provincial policy statement that the land is required for the expansion of the existing settlement area or identified of a new settlement area. 3, that the removal of the land from the agricultural resource area designation be considered outside the comprehensive review where it is demonstrated that the land does not meet the requirements of the agricultural resource area. Through A municipal-wide assessment, the LEAR study, B, an area-specific assessment, where the area assessment is the 250 hectare in the area boundaries are agreed to by the city and demonstrates 1, based upon the new information related to one or more LEAR factors and the land's not part of the prime agricultural area. 2, any redesignation would avoid the potential of adverse impacts on the adjacent agricultural lands of operation, or if unavoidable, such adverse impacts are mitigated to the extent feasible. The outcome of the area-specific assessment would be general rural area designation that is at least 250 hectares in size, or the smaller area would be logical extension or the existing general rules of designation. If the different rural designation being proposed then needed for the designation within the time frame of the official plan must also be established. Be it further resolved that legal services be directed to advance at the LPAT at the position of the city flowing from the city's disposition of this matter.
Okay, so I'm not to Mr. Willis, to Mr. Mark. Tell us why we need to do this today.
Why this needs to be done today, Madam Chair, is that there is a hearing that is scheduled to commence on March the 4th dealing with the agricultural issues in the official plan. The only remaining issue is, in fact, this modification. In a nutshell, Council adopted a plan that would have allowed a redesignation from agricultural resource lands at any time. The Minister modified the plan to say, no, you can only do it at a comprehensive review. The city and others appealed the Minister's modification. A settlement that has been reached, that has been agreed by all staff, the Minister, and all the other appellants, that would say the plan could be, an amendment could be sought to redesignate lands from agricultural resource area at any time, but it would be subject to the criteria that Vice Chair Tierney read out, set forth in Policy 3. So as I said, this is going to a hearing on March the 4th. We need Council's endorsement of a settlement to have a position. Everyone else is in agreement with this policy, Madam Chair.
Okay. Is that carried? Carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go back to the beginning of the future of the City of Ottawa, and I'll ask Mr. Willis to come forward. Talk about Ottawa Next beyond 2036, and with him is Mr. John Smith. Do we need the lights down?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
This is a very big day.
It is a big day. I'm joined here just at the table by John Smith, our Director of Long-Range Planning and Economic Development, and two of the staff who've worked very, very hard on the Beyond 2036 report and the work plan for the official plan. So Carol Reddy and George Clayton are here with me as well. I also want to acknowledge that one of our consultants who assisted us in the process, Mr. Joe Barrage, who spoke with some councillors earlier this morning, is also in the audience as well to assist us on this. It is a big day. Councillors, today we are asking for your approval of the work plan for the new City of Ottawa official plan. The official plan we have today is for the most part a product of our amalgamation. Now, almost 20 years later, it is time to do a major refresh. This is an ambitious project. We don't intend to tinker at the margins, but we will propose a new plan that replaces our current plan, a plan that looks forward and will help the city meet future challenges and seize the opportunities to come. The pace of change is accelerating in the world. That's not just an Ottawa phenomenon, that's all around the world. And it will continue to accelerate from an economic, environmental, social, and technological
Can you talk up a little bit, please? Just bring it forward, because there's too much people talking and I can't really... I don't think everybody can hear well. Thank you.
Our goal is to have a new official plan that is both adaptable and resilient to help us navigate the changes that will come, not only over the next 25 years, but in the decades that follow. For those of you who've heard me speak before, you know I always like talking a little about the history of planning in Ottawa. It's a bit of a thing for me. So if you look back at our population and understand the history of Ottawa, we just see where we've come in globally what a very short period of time. Il suffit de regarder à quoi ressemblait la ville auparavant pour constater à quel point elle a changé. If you go right back to our incorporation in 1855, we were a small lumber town. We had 60 stores. We had 3 banks, 3 insurance offices, 3 newspapers. Back at the time, we were lucky we had more then. 1 telegraph office and 7 schools and a canal connecting it to Lake Ontario. The decision to make us the national capital was the big game changer that fundamentally changed our trajectory as a city. It's very fair to say that if Ottawa was not the national capital, we would not be the city we are today, nor would we have the opportunities that we have in the future. The first major urban plan that covered beyond just the downtown, there were earlier plans, but they focused just on the downtown. So if you think about a bigger trajectory of it, was the Grey Bear Plan of 1950, which was a federal plan. That was not a municipal plan. And that plan was over 70 years ago now. There were earlier plans, but very limited. The legacy of the Grey Bear Plan for us, which we see today in many ways, was growth in areas south and east of the Rideau River. Councillor Cloutier's ward, for example, didn't even exist. Much of Councillor Brockington's ward didn't exist at that time, and the Grey Bear Plan contemplated the growth in that area. And College Ward and Councillor Chiarelli's, for example, were all kind of byproducts of this plan. The Greenbelt was a creation of this plan, and the Riverfront Parkway system and freight rail modern rationalization in the region were a creation of this plan. But this plan was vastly car-oriented. As a matter of fact, it contemplated the removal of public transportation by rail in the city, and it was this plan also vastly underestimated Ottawa's growth. It did have a projection for about now, and we're about 3 times larger a city than it had projected we would be at this stage in time. Next slide. Sorry, we're missing one. Must have been a click. Excuse us. We're having a technological issue. So this is the regional municipality of Ottawa Carleton official plan from 1974. This is 45 years ago. And in its day, this was a state-of-the-art official plan in North America. It was the first of its kind in North America that contemplated the idea of a city center connected to satellite suburban communities in the west, south, and east by high-order rapid transit, which in those days was the bus rapid transit system, the BRT, which is the transit way that was ultimately built. And, you know, it's interesting. If you think back, if I was sitting here in 1970 and I said to council, we're going to build a series of bus highways connecting a bunch of new communities out to the outer edges of a new cities being created on the east, west, and south, I think you would have given me a funny look. But it was a visionary plan, and in its day, it was copied. As a matter of fact, our bus rapid transit system today, my colleague Mr. Manconi tells me we still get visitors from around the world who come to see our BRT system as being one of the most effective in the entire world. And the other legacy it left us, which is real for you today, is that BRT system was built with the idea of converting it one day to rail. So the grades were set so it could ultimately be built to rail. We don't have level crossings. We have grade separations. So today, when you make the decision on Stage 2 LRT, it is cheaper to build because of the decisions made in 1974. So it is an incredible legacy for us. So let's talk about today. As the mayor has said in his State of the City address, we calculate that before Canada Day sometime, we will pass the 1 million population mark, which is a big milestone for any city. Ottawa forms part of a bigger region, which Statistics Canada calls the Ottawa-Gatineau metropolitan area. And together, we with Gatineau and some of the smaller municipalities are a population of 1.5 million people today. We are one of Canada's 6 largest metropolitan regions, and we have grown physically in all that time. We've grown further in Canada and Stittsville, Orleans, Barrhaven, beyond the Greenbelt. We have intensified in the core in many ways. We have actually a very stable downtown population, which not every North American city has. And this is consistent with what that regional official plan intended. Mais Ottawa n'a pas seulement pris de l'expansion, elle s'est fondamentalement transformée au fil du temps. Je vous donne quelques exemples. We've moved from our initial resource-based roots, moving primarily to a government town, but now we're a much more complex knowledge-based diversified economy. Almost half of us in Ottawa who are employed work in the public administration field, healthcare and education sectors, including 145,000 residents working for the Government of Canada last time we checked. But we are diversifying in our economy, and there are many, many more businesses in the city than there used to be, and we have growth in many new sectors. We're also diverse in terms of our origins for many of us. So in 1941, 98% of Ottawa residents were of European background. Today, over 1 in 5 residents were born outside of Canada, the vast majority coming from Asia, the Americas, and Africa. There are also close to 40,000 residents in the city today who identify themselves as Indigenous. We're also a much more vibrant cultural city. Used to be the city that fun forgot, as they said, but things have changed dramatically, and we've seen some major movement in that area in the last number of years, investments in cultural events and cultural institutions, and this growth and diversity has led to a much more vibrant city life. So we're getting a reputation for arts, culture, and festivals beyond just the national institutions. We are an urban city, without a doubt. We've grown from a small town capital to be the significant center of a metropolitan region, and as we discussed earlier today, we're part of a complex of urban regions that includes Montreal and Toronto as well. And then we, collectively, the 3 of us, are facing competition from other parts of North America and around the world. So when you think about an official plan, the main question is, what is our future going to be? It's fair to say that the changes to Ottawa the past century have been dramatic, and of course we're continuing to change. In fact, the pace of social and technological change has increased so rapidly in the last 50 years that the plans we have done have had trouble keeping up, as a matter of fact, with the rate of change. So what will be the drivers for the next century for us? And this is some of the work we looked at in our key project called Beyond 2036. En décembre 2016, le Conseil a demandé au personnel d'entreprendre une étude de planification sur la croissance future de la ville afin de préparer le terrain pour le prochain examen du plan officiel. So over the past year, we have been engaging in a very broad cross-section of city stakeholders to discuss these very questions. What are those big drivers that will affect us in the future that we have to use to frame our next official plan? In the resulting planning study we're presenting today, we looked at what forces will drive change over the coming decades, and we have developed some plausible scenarios based on the change drivers. Now, I want to emphasize, the intention was not to portray scenarios and pick one to hit. The idea was to put a broad range of scenarios of what might happen out there so that we could plan accordingly to be adaptable should any of those scenarios hit. Certainly, some of those scenarios have positive attributes and some have negative attributes if we don't take action, but the idea of choosing scenarios is to understand what's the range of things that could possibly face us. I'm going to take you through some of the things we found. So economic growth in contemporary cities will be dominated by the knowledge sector. Mr. Berge talked about this morning earlier. Almost 80% of our workforce is already employed in this area if you broadly interpret what a knowledge-based workforce actually includes. In addition, the digital revolution is transforming all sectors of the economy as more digital processes replace human functions. Well-trained labor will be in an increasing demand both locally and internationally, and we can't take for granted how easy it is going to be to get that. And Councillor Suds isn't here, but she would tell you in her ward in the Canada North Business Park, they are struggling to find talent because they are facing ferocious competition from around the world. So how do we prepare for these transformations? How can Ottawa get a larger share of the immigrants that come to Canada? How do we make sure that the infrastructure exists to encourage innovation? Our competition is no longer just Toronto, Montreal, or even Calgary. We are competing to maintain our existing workforce and retain our kids in the city when they're educated and they're ready to work. One of the strongest urban economic forces restructuring the world is a system of cities as of spikiness. Mr. Berge talked about this today, where fewer cities are having a bigger dominance in the world economy. And this trend towards concentration of higher order economic activity in fewer cities is playing out even in North America. We're seeing it. So if you look at New York City's economy, it's bigger than Spain's and it's bigger than Canada's. So as we see this force coming together, now it's not all bad. I mean, we have the opportunity to collaborate with our biggest neighbors, and so that we collectively together are that same level of competition with the world. And because Toronto and Montreal both have advantages of their own, we do feel optimistic that should we work together on this, will solidify our own advantages. And, this will be a mega region that will be a global competitor. So the questions we're asking in the official plan process that proceed is how do we improve linkages between this city, its airports, to the other cities of the world, and work collaboratively on these interglobal transportation systems with Toronto and Montreal? How can we give the Ottawa's own Macdonald-Cartier International Airport the flexibility it needs to grow and diversify? Can we give Ottawa a competitive advantage through its digital infrastructure? So these are the big systems of change that have huge economic implications. Climate change is absolutely something we have to plan to adapt to and try to mitigate in every way we possibly can. We contain thousands of hectares of forests, wetlands, and other natural lands close to the built-up areas of the city. It's very much what makes the city a very beautiful place to live. And these features are central to our own identity. I mean, you can't imagine those pictures of Ottawa with the loss of some of those important natural attributes in our city. And that's true in every ward of the city. It's very true. With population growth, outwards and becoming dense, it's going to be a challenge to find areas for urban green spaces and protect natural systems close to the urban boundary. Climate change will have a significant effect on Ottawa's natural environment. Provincial estimates say that Eastern Ontario will see increases in summer temperatures between 2 to 3 degrees by 2041 to 2070, and will also have increased storm events, including flooding, ice, and windstorms. Selon les résultats de cette étude, on peut s'attendre à une pression accrue sur l'environnement naturel, les infrastructures, la gestion des situations d'urgence et la santé publique. Que pouvons-nous faire pour protéger et élargir nos espaces naturels dans le contexte des pressions associées au changement climatique et à l'aménagement? Comment pouvons-nous faire en sorte que l'investissement en infrastructure d'Ottawa emprunte la voie de développement durable compte tenu de ces pressions? Immigration is essential to increasing population and supporting the growth of our labor force. However, many immigrants who move to Ottawa don't stay. They leave because of fewer opportunities and the competition from bigger cities. So job opportunities and skills accreditation, and I appreciate that as not an area of municipal jurisdiction, but that actually will have a big impact on our ability to retain people who come to Canada to work. And so it's important that we show that we care in these matters with the governments who do control those issues. Also as important is people come to live in communities. They don't come just to live in the big Ottawa. They come to live in communities within Ottawa. So communities are the backbone of a welcoming environment for people, and whether they be our own children who we wish to stay in the city or people coming to Ottawa either on rotation because of a federal job or coming to stay permanently through immigration. And what that complete community involves is proximity to affordable transportation, to work, to school, shopping, places of worship, child care clinics, recreation. It includes affordable housing and includes special services to support newcomers to Canada. So we're asking in this process, how can we create the conditions to attract and retain immigrants, and how do we better help people integrate into communities in our city? One of the things our study Beyond 2036 showed is that there are pressures on community cohesion all across North America. And a livable city is one where communities are socially, economically, and culturally connected. Community cohesion creates a sense of shared belonging for residents of all backgrounds and supports diversity. There have to be equal opportunities to everyone for access to services, employment, and education. Population growth in well-defined neighborhoods creates economies of scale that allow new amenities to come. This is what we're seeing in some of our areas where we've had intensification. We're actually getting new, really high-quality amenities in these areas. It also allows cultural offerings. It allows livelier public spaces and urban diversity. However, growth does bring some disparities in some areas, and it doesn't always mean just differences in wealth. It could also mean different accesses to transit, different accesses to housing that's affordable, employment, and parks and public spaces, and health and public services. So the questions we're asking in this process is, how can we move Ottawa's existing communities to being more complete, and how can we encourage neighborhoods to thrive in a bigger city? Ottawa's future prosperity is linked to efficient movement of people and goods. If well managed, a strong and integrated mobility network will allow Ottawa to compete with cities nationally and globally. For a growing number of people, this is a shift away from what they used to do, which is taking their own car, to going to actually a suite of services, not just one thing. So that they may use their car for certain activities that you need to do in your daily life. Cycling, walking, light rail transit, car sharing, ride sharing, those other things. People will use a combination of services in bigger cities. And if you travel and you go to bigger cities, you see this playing out on the ground already today. We also have a real issue that same-day delivery has changed our life. I never cease to be amazed that I order something with a click and a day later it's on my doorstep, but that has actual implications in the way our city actually works. So online shopping is creating a growth in public expectations on goods movement. People expect those goods to be able to move within our cities rapidly. So what we're seeing in other parts of the world is changing delivery modes. We're seeing new land uses called click and collect places, where if you order it, it doesn't necessarily come to your house, but it goes to a depot very close to where you live. And that and it plays with neighborhood storefronts, and it'll change the way our main streets will behave over time. We want to ensure we still have vibrant main streets, and we have to find a way to make both of these things happen at the same time. So can we use these technological advances in communications to support a more livable city? How can the city remain nimble to a whole bunch of trends we can't predict today? Because we can't predict. We don't have the crystal ball for how this is entirely going to play out. But can we make our policies adaptive so as the changes come in, we're not caught flat-footed? So the shape of the city is going to change. And there will be a reciprocal relationship between the city and mobility. These things have to work together. Much of our shape of our city today has been driven by convenience and moving around, and that will become more and more significant as the city gets larger. As a result, the city is going to continue to expand. We will see new communities built. We will see new neighborhoods built. And the strength of our city will be that those things feel like complete neighborhoods in many other areas of the city. But we have to change our mentality. We are a metropolitan region now. We're not just a city. Work has changed. The need of businesses and industry are changing. The way we move in the city is changing. Housing. If you read the papers and see what Toronto is facing and other cities are facing, affordability cannot be taken for granted. We actually have to do work to ensure that we maintain that affordability within our city. And as we get more and more diverse, we have to make sure that the offerings support that diversity. So can we become more compact and still affordable and livable? That's a challenge for the official plan. It's one of those big questions we have to get our hand around. How can we make our suburban communities more complete while still maintaining a thriving core? How can we sustain rural villages and hamlets and give residents out in those rural areas viable opportunities to stay living in the rural area as they age out of their single homes? Right now, the policy environment in both Ottawa and provincially is not very supportive to building multifamily housing for people who need to live in assisted living in rural communities, and that has to change, because we will lose rural communities if they can't be sustained by some smart choices about making sure hamlets and villages can survive. Ottawa is very proud of its brand as a capital city, and we are very fortunate to have that opportunity. But we have to still define ourselves as a global mid-sized city. As we become more diverse through immigration, there's an opportunity to support the diversity by advancing cultural offerings through festivals, the arts, food, crafts, artisan innovations, and emerging technologies. Ottawa est par ailleurs une ville rurale, un aspect qui jusqu'à présent n'a pas été mis de l'avant dans l'identité de la ville. En effet, les terres rurales occupent 90% de son territoire. So that vision of a city does have to include both an urban and a rural component. And there aren't other comparators in Canada of cities that have this mix that we have. So we have to do it our way to ensure that we do cover both at the same time. A vibrant public realm is going to be very important to this. This slide says it all about what happens when the offerings are there. People really want to be part of it, and we need to promote our built heritage, neighborhood identity, and street life. We need to have a renewed focus on the Ottawa River and the offering, what the enormous potential that it has, and all aspects of our identity as a city that involve being a capital and a mid-sized city at the same time. So we have to work with our partners, the National Capital Commission, Parks Canada, the federal government, on looking at the Ottawa River, the Rideau River, the canal as opportunities, and how do we promote Ottawa together as a mature urban capital. And I should say the Ville de Gatineau is also a key partner in that discussion. So our report, Ottawa Beyond 2036, provided the overall structure for the review. It identified the key questions we need to carry forward into that next phase. We've identified those forces that potentially will shape us, and we now have to take this and turn it into policy directions. And now I'm going to turn to what the official plan process is going to look like. So once Council approves the official plan, ultimately it will be implemented through zoning, city programs and funding, as well as joint action with our partners and stakeholders. So what is an official plan? I think it's probably important to just base ourselves for a moment on that. The official plan under provincial legislation provides the policy framework to guide our physical development, and it talks about regulating land use, managing growth and change in urban, suburban, and rural areas, planning for public works and infrastructure, planning for new communities and existing areas undergoing change, and preserving natural systems while providing for wise use of resources. A lot of this comes right from provincial legislation. So a forward-looking official plan, we want to go from that 2003 plan to a brand new plan. Comme j'ai mentionné en introduction, notre plan officiel actuel a presque 20 ans. Il a été créé dans le but de regrouper 11 municipalités en une seule ville. Nous avons fait du bon travail dans le cadre de ce plan, mais il est temps pour nous d'adopter une nouvelle stratégie de planification pour la ville d'Ottawa. Une stratégie qui permette d'assurer la compétitivité et la prospérité des entreprises basées à Ottawa, une stratégie qui permettra à Ottawa de se démarquer des villes de taille moyenne du reste du monde pour attirer les cerveaux les plus brillants et les plus talentueux. Une stratégie qui contribue à faire de notre ville un lieu dynamique où il fait bon vivre. Une stratégie qui tient compte du fait que nous vivons dans un monde où tout évolue rapidement et que nous devrons être résilients face aux changements et aux bouleversements à venir. So we have a four-phase process for our official plan, and we're asking for you to approve, you and council to approve this process today. The first phase is our background studies, which is a series of discussion papers, and I'll talk about that in a coming slide, and also approval of population and employment projections, which drive any official plan. The second phase will be where we prepare the policy directions for council's endorsement, and when council endorses those policy directions, we will then turn that actual into draft policy for the official plan, and that's when we will table the draft official plan document in phase 3 at Planning Committee and Council, and these will all have significant stakeholder input, and I'll talk about that on another slide. And then ultimately, council will adopt it, and then it must go to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, who will approve it. So as part of the engagement process, we want to use a combination of websites, social media, and community stakeholder engagement events. We know there are people who are comfortable with coming to open houses and meetings, but increasingly many of our younger residents, or maybe some people who aren't comfortable talking at a public meeting, are more comfortable providing comments online. And several of our consultations we've done in the last year are showing an increasing demand for online consultations. So we have a dedicated website that is live, or will be momentarily, and it will provide all of this background information. Am I right, Carol?
Yes, correct.
Carol says I'm right. It's live. So the information will be there. People can get a chance to get it. They'll have lots of opportunity to provide it, and we will be scheduling a series of consultations over the next little while. Des consultations sont menées tout au long du processus de révision du plan officiel, incluant des consultations sur les documents de travail, des consultations sur les orientations stratégiques, des consultations sur la version plénière du plan officiel. So our two waves of discussion papers. The first phase are those papers we feel that could have significant changes in potential directions of the city. The second wave is more improving the policies that we already have that we know need modernization, but the policy framework we've got is a good starting point, but it's about bringing it up to date. So we've broken them into two bits. So wave one will address things like what is the greater metropolitan region? What is that concept? Where do we go from here? We're going to talk about the economy, working in close partnership with Ottawa Public Health, and Dr. Etches is here today. She's been working with me and the team very closely on the process. We're going to talk about the healthy Ottawa as a cornerstone of this new plan. It's really important that that's something we add a major new consideration on. We're going to look at energy, climate, housing, infrastructure and water management, natural Ottawa and rural Ottawa. And infrastructure more broadly includes mobility and other elements. And then the second phase is, when we get into the nitty-gritty of the land use designations, we get into the specific growth projections. We get council's concurrence to a growth management strategy. We finalize the mobility strategy based on the growth management strategy, look at a housing policy update based on that, urban design and heritage, employment lens, and how we're going to manage them in the future and make them adaptable, and the cultural aspect. So in the first phase of the official plan review, we want to get Ottawa residents interested and participating in the review. We want to reach out to groups that are traditionally underrepresented in municipal planning processes. To this end, we are going to be having an open house on March 4th to present the major themes of the official plan to the public. There'll be an afternoon session and an evening session. We're going to have follow-up meetings with target stakeholder groups, including Indigenous groups, New Canadians, small businesses, seniors, and youth. We're providing all of you councillors with engagement packages so that you could do your own consultations in your own communities. And we'll work with you if you need some staff help to come and talk about this. We'd be glad to help on that. And so, because we think you're an important partner in reaching out to people as well in your own communities. And we'll be organizing a series of discussion panels on some specific themes. So our goal, what we're trying to achieve, is that Ottawa is the most livable mid-sized city in North America, and we need to keep focused on this core objective as we deliver this work plan. And thank you, Madam Chair. I know this was a longer presentation, but this is a really important milestone project for us, and we're happy to answer any questions.
It was well worth the time. Thank you very much. Okay, normally we would go to the delegations first before we ask questions of staff. Everyone okay with that? Okay. But thank you very much to all of you. So stay tuned. We have speakers. The first speaker up is Erwin Dreesen. Erwin sent his comments in as well yesterday. Meanwhile, while Mr. Dreesen's getting set up, anybody who wants to ask questions after the speaker, so Councillor Dudas, Councillor Kavanagh, I saw. Kavanagh, Elshantiri. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And
I'm just going to say this because you're the first speaker. You're the first speaker up today, so I'm just going to say this. It's 5 minutes you have to speak.
Yes. Back in January 2018, with the participation of senior city staff, about 100 people gathered on a Saturday morning to discuss planning issues under the theme of Ottawa, a city of neighborhoods. Many of us were led to believe that the city had bought into the idea of building up the new official plan from the ground up, beginning with asking what people want for their neighborhoods. The recent life-sized city series on TVO with Michael Colville-Anderson demonstrated over and over what difference it makes to one's quality of life when neighborhoods are empowered and listened to. The work plan before you signals instead that what we can expect is same old, same old. 2 waves of discussion papers, an impossibly long list of stakeholders, a sponsors group of the chairs and vice chairs of the Planning and Rural Affairs Committees who are to, quote, champion and support, end quote, the project. Worse, what neighborhood grounding there is in the current OP appears in danger of disappearing. I quote from page 17 of the staff report, quote, staff anticipate that the new plan will consolidate the existing 4 volumes that make up the plan today. These include secondary plans and site-specific policies, which will be reviewed to remove duplication or conflicting policies and directions. End quote. I have carefully read the Beyond 2036 report, and I regret to say I found it largely an exercise in futility, with a bias. Futility in that the scenarios are just some of many conceivable. The discussion of drivers rarely rises above generalities, and the planning implications mostly border on stating the obvious. With a bias, because apart from one scenario that would see Ottawa essentially remain a government town, implications of which are ignored in the rest of the report, the authors are convinced that will be a metropolis of 2 to 3 million by the end of the century, will all be fully digitized knowledge workers and be able to zip seamlessly to both Montreal and Toronto on high-speed trains. Still, to its credit, staff draws some good lessons from the exercise. Housing choices are inadequate, future modes of mobility are uncertain, urban communities that have been densified are not seeing the benefits, we must strengthen neighborhoods as we renew its infrastructure and raise its level of transit service. I have no idea what that means. Ottawa can leverage its attributes better, and urban, suburban, and rural communities all have something to complain about. Unfortunately, in that list in the staff report, I don't see any urgency to deal with climate change, which is a very concerning omission, and I'm glad to hear some contrary remarks from Mr. Willis. Councillors, if I had my way, I would throw this work plan out. Instead, I would direct staff to, over the next 2 years, do 2 things. Review and update all secondary plans, turn all community design plans into SPs, fill in the gaps where there is neither an SP nor a CDP, and 2, at the same time, develop a consensus document expressing what we can all agree on, a vision, principles, objectives, and constraints. maybe I missed it, but I was told that there would be a motion to substitute the January 2019 version for the older version that was first published. I don't know whether that motion was passed or not. I hate to tell you, this supposedly corrected version could use more copy editing, but if you want me to point out where, you'll have to pay me. Not a copy editing matter is the claim in Annex 1 that the grand total of 302 responses to a survey that was available for 2.5 months mean a 76% quote overall response rate. Worse is that any rate is given at all to all of 10 responses from young people in another survey. And that the staff report summarizes these feedback results without blushing instills little confidence in the consultation process that we are to see over the next 3 years. Chair Harder, in her op-ed in the Ottawa Business Journal, promised that the city, quote, will ensure that future development is adapted to the needs of residents and businesses within each community, end quote. Why then not start by finding out what residents and businesses want? This work plan does not do that. I conclude by invoking some of the final words of the late Paul Dewar, quote, it is hard to know how to make a difference. The secret is not to focus on how to solve the problem, but to concentrate on what you can contribute to your country, your community, and neighbors.
Thank you.
Quote. This is my contribution.
Thank you.
I thank you for your attention and wish you Godspeed.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? Thank you very much. I'm going to have all those motions read out. All the motions will be read out now, so you'll see them, okay? Or you'll at least hear them. Are we putting them up on the board as well? We will as they're introduced, so just watch the boards. Vice Chair Tierney will move all of those.
Great. I'll just dispense with the whereases. Therefore, it be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development to request the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to use his powers under Section 4.5 of the Provincial Policy Statement to pre-authorize the City to complete the official plan on the basis of the 25-year planning horizon, and be it further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the Mayor on behalf of City Council to write to local members of the Provincial Legislature to solicit support for the Council's request for a longer planning horizon, and be further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council direct the Planning Committee Chair to proactively seek meetings with Ottawa's political minister and the Minister of Municipal Affairs to advance Council's request to extend the planning horizon, and that the request by City Council 25 years ago, and that the Chair verbally report to the Committee as steps were taken to achieve a longer planning horizon. Madam Chair, we also have another one. And this is just some technical. Therefore, it be resolved that document 1 be replaced with the revised version and distributed to the committee coordinator. I think that addresses something that Mr. Dressen brought up. Yet another motion. Therefore, it be resolved that the study title Ottawa Next Beyond 2034 be tabled and amended as such that the results of 2036, apologies, be tabled and amended as such, the results of Milestone 1 and Milestone 2 be incorporated into the document so that the three elements, Ottawa Next Beyond 2036, Milestone 1, and Milestone 2, together create one comprehensive document to be presented to the Committee and Council as the schedule November 2019. Only a couple more, Madam Chair. Correct one too? Mm-hmm. So therefore it be resolved that the tasks of Milestone 4 as outlined in the report be realigned so the analysis of the urban land requirements to be met by the projected 2046 housing and employment needs and criteria by which the land was selected compromise of the core task 4, and be further resolved that the report recommends the new land selection criteria, evaluate and provide on the following locations of the financial sustainability over the long term for both capital and operating perspectives, locations that the results complete communities, that the support of the city's investment in light rail transit, evaluate the locations within the existing build-up areas and the likelihood of achieving the required densities, the age and conditions of the required infrastructure and transit service level mappings, which produce capital budget projections to support the housing and employment needs, will be implemented through the life of the plan. Be it further resolved that the task 4 be presented to Planning Committee and Council for approval as recommended in June 2020, and be it further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council allow General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure and Economic Development the authority to break the adoption period of the new official plan into 2 stages, so that there's the growth management matters are adopted by Council in Q 2021, and the policy modernization of the remainder of the plan be adopted at the following dates in the next term of Council. Be it further resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council direct General Manager of Planning and Information Economic Development to provide a revised schedule for the official plan to Planning Committee by the end of Q 2019. Yet another motion, Madam Chair. The final one, therefore, be resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that the Chair of the Standing Committee on the Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management of Councilor Sponsor Group for the official plan review. And that is the motions in front of you, Madam Chair.
Well, that's a heck of a lot. So just let me ask you, would it be easier for you if you had them all printed for you, since you're maybe just... Well, I know they're on the screen, but they're on the screen at the same time, so people would have to... I'm just asking. Let us know if you want a printed copy. How many printed copies do we want? One? Okay. Thank you. All right. Back to our delegations. Next one up is Paul Johannes from the Green Space Alliance of Canada's Capital. Paul? Followed by Sheila Perry. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for calling me. So I speak today as a resident, a member of the Beyond 2036 Sounding Board, and as chair of the Green Space Alliance of Canada's Capital. So first I'd wish to thank the City of Ottawa for inviting me to be part of the Sounding Board. It was an enriching experience, an exercise. It provided the opportunity to meet a lot of outstanding men and women from across every sector of civil society in Ottawa. So a worthwhile exercise. We didn't always quite understand where the scenario building and driver and disruptor identifying was leading us, but upon reading the report, I can at minimum recognize many scenarios that I would definitely not want to see happen. So that alone provides guidance. I note with satisfaction in the executive summary that it stated that the report 2036 will inform the development of the new official plan, including the Green Space Master Plan, which hasn't been updated since 2003, so that was a welcome piece of information. And I'm also struck by the recognition in the introduction to the report on page 7, and I'll quote from it, the 4 themes, mobility and urban form, economic development, environment, and quality of life, are not meant to be separate and stand alone, but rather should be read as interrelated with one another. Notably, the environment is at the base of our ability to develop our society, economy, and quality of life. So I like the idea that this is like an underpinning piece that everything else is built on. So that's a point I'll return to later on. Section 6.3 of the report on the environment theme is exhaustive. It's well structured. The planning considerations that are developed from that section alone could provide a comprehensive framework for the city's environmental plans and policies. So kudos from our point of view. In the staff report, we find that there's references to an air quality and climate change master plan, a parks plan. Elsewhere, it's a green space / parks master plan. It's difficult to really ascertain from the report what's the overall structure really that's coming forward for this new official plan. So maybe some clear articulation of these plan elements in the report could be worked on, could be improved on before this is being addressed by Council, just to get a better picture of what it is that the beast looks like, even if it's broad outlines. So However, in the spirit of drivers and disruptors, there's one major omission in all this material. Even though most of the work was performed just a year ago, everything really has changed since then. We are now, without a doubt, facing a climate emergency. Not sometime in the future, not way out in scenario timeframes, but right now. And decisive and effective action has to be taken in the next 10 years, which is the period covered by this plan. So really, effectively, this new official plan must be the city's climate emergency plan. As noted in the introduction, the environment theme underpins the success of all the other domains. So this has implications for the work plan that's outlined on pages 17 and 18 of the staff report. To truly put a climate lens on the official plan, on the next official plan, Wave 1 should be limited to setting out what imperatively must be achieved in the next 10 years in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and increasing our carbon sinks. Having established that through that phase, and Wave 2 can be built around how to achieve these goals through the actions in mobility built form, economic development, environment, quality of life domains. But really, there needs to be that overarching theme, I believe, to this new official plan. This is the city's first official plan in the era of the climate emergency. So it must reflect this imperative above all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Johannes? Well, thank you very much, sir. Did you have any comments at all on that, Mr. Willis?
Madam Chair, just be really brief. Mr. Johannes provided some really helpful contribution to the process, as his group did, and certainly he raises the issue of a climate lens. I had a really useful meeting with Ecology Ottawa, who showed me the climate lens the federal government is using now for their work. We think we can adapt that to use in our own process, and we're actually looking at the feasibility of doing that right now because we agree there needs to be a climate lens overlay on this, and they have a very practical approach that I think we can just adapt. So those discussions are still going.
There you go, Mr. Johannes. Sheila Perry, President of the FCA, followed by David McNichol. Welcome, Sheila. Thanks for all the work you do, all times of the day, all crazy hours.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. As you mentioned, I'm president of the Federation of Citizens Association and also chair of our Planning and Zoning Committee, which has over 60 members across the city, and our community associations number 50 and over. We're all volunteers, and part of this is very important, obviously, for looking ahead at the future of Ottawa. So as a participant in the sounding board, we're really pleased to be part of this. I've circulated a letter, hopefully everyone has, and I just want to touch on some of the highlights. The Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 report proposes making Ottawa the most livable mid-sized city in North America. I suggest adding a neighborhood dimension to that. Make Ottawa the most livable mid-sized city of strong neighborhoods and complete communities in North America. Strong neighborhoods are the foundation to a strong, resilient, and adaptable city. The very goals Ottawa Next has rightly identified as essential to dealing well with whatever an unpredictable future may be in store for us. And we certainly know those challenges. Tornadoes, snowstorms, etc. As to how we go about it, here's a process for your consideration. What follows is all about data. What should be counted and how do you count it? First, define the terms. Decide what livable really means. What is a complete community? What does this mean? Second, pick the most livable North American cities to compare with Ottawa. Examples might be Edmonton, Calgary, partners, challenges. Third, decide what parameters of livability you want to compare. There are lots of choices, but one should be governance structure, which best supports the development of strong neighborhoods and complete communities. Fourth, assess and quantify how each city is doing using a common baseline, say the 2017 data. There are lots of livability metrics online to pick and choose from. And we see this, one example being Toronto and how they have their data listed. And you see that with the neighborhoods. You have a very good baseline to draw on for good information. Fifth, create a dashboard in the open data portal to track results. Make progress a term of council priority and engage us all in the working towards this improvement. And sixth, invite other cities, especially Canadian cities, to join in the race to the top. There's nothing like having a partner in this and taking some of those examples of other great progress. The official work plan. As for the Ottawa Next scenario building exercise, it's an interesting read, but as the authors acknowledge, it's not a prediction. The authors of Ottawa Next anticipate that unknowable and unpredictable transformative discontinuities await us. However, we can respond by building up Ottawa's adaptability and resilience, just as the authors of Ottawa Next suggest. How do we do that? I hope that the theme discussion papers will help us come up with those answers to how best to achieve strong, vibrant, diverse neighborhoods. In conclusion, doing better is what we've always been trying to do all along, but it doesn't respond to two fundamental but unanswered questions. First, what do we really want for Ottawa in 25 years? What do we want it to be? I've suggested the vision statement about livability needs reference to strong neighborhoods and complete communities. Second, what do we need to do to make that happen? That's for the OP review to determine. But I suggest that using the current official plan as a baseline for the next risks seriously undershooting what is needed to guide us through the next 10 years and well beyond. So in conclusion, a number of things have been suggested, but bottom line is neighborhoods matter. And as one of the previous people had expressed, the FCA twinned and partnered with the city to have a forum in January 2018, and our whole caption in that was Ottawa is a city of neighborhoods. And if we take that as a model, I think this will help us tremendously in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, that was right at the beginning of your submission, and that was what I took away from it the most, Sheila. Councillor Dudas has a question for you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Perry, for coming and speaking to this, and thank you for all the work you do. Having been a past president of the Community Association for a decade, I fully understand the effort that it takes for volunteers to do this. I guess I'm just wondering, in the context of looking at this report and us looking at our evolving city, you're speaking to neighborhoods, and I'd really like to get a better understanding of your definition of what a neighborhood is. Because, are you defining it based on community association boundaries? Are you talking about new growing communities? We are all looking at mobility as one aspect of connecting communities. I'd really like to get a better comprehension of what you define as a neighborhood in this very vast and diverse city.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for the question. Neighborhoods vary, obviously, across the city, and we see that really based on the population base. For example, Ottawa, just thinking of the ward system, that really gives you a confined or a mapped area. If we look at the Ottawa Neighborhood Study, for example, which we're part of, there's very clear definitions there, and mapping that is critical for that, because people know where that captive area is. You amass the data, et cetera, from it. It's a fine balance, and one of those things is not to have this overwhelming, I would call maybe potentially NIMBYism. It's much more fluid in one way, and it's to have a balance. So if you look at the complete community scenario, there's some great models of what that all entails, and it's everything from things like you mentioned, mobility, it's that transportation, it's what are those facilities, what's the health of the community, so that you have a better balance in these communities, and that's going to be really, really important in this city as we go forward, so no community is left behind. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. And you mentioned that you work with the Ottawa Neighbourhood Study Group. I just wanted to point out that in my experience, they don't get suburbs and their names right at all. For example, in 1951, my parents were one of the first ones to buy a home in St. Clair Gardens. It's still called St. Clair Gardens. Blackburn Hamlet's called Blackburn Hamlet. Bell's Corners is called Bell's Corners. Barrhaven, though, is a large Ontario city with over 90,000 people in it, and it's got neighborhoods that Ottawa Neighborhood Service doesn't have a clue about. Yeah. So I know that one of the things you want to do is put a lens on that, but I'd ask you not to do it in the suburban area, because it's very much defined by subdivisions. And there's some that from the 80s, for example, like I'm sure, well, we all know, like in Connecticut, Glencairn, that's way before the 80s. Centerpoint, definitely you have in Stittsville, the older area up on Ann Street and all that, which was very old kind of a subdivision. Councillor Blais, you have it. I have certainly the same kind of thing. And then you have like newer ones like Half Moon Bay, which is, it will be the moniker for it. It's in Barrhaven, but it's Half Moon Bay. So, because one thing, and I hope that I'm asking you if you would agree, that when we start the ward boundaries, and you mentioned wards, which is why I'm bringing this up, that it would make more sense, or a lot of sense, to look at the communities as opposed to the ward boundaries being a street. And I think in the last go-round, it was the street that defined it, whether it was the geographic river, right? And what it did in some of our decisions was split communities. I certainly have that in Barrhaven, and people don't like it. So I think it's a great part of the conversation. I think take away to clerks that are here, or to Mr. Mark when we start the ward boundary review, and Mr. Willis. I think that that's something that your neighborhood ties into what we're talking about today, and certainly other pieces of what we'll do in this term. So thanks very much. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for all the work you do.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is David McNichol, followed by Alex Cullen and Ted Phillips.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, Chair Harder. So I sent out an email last night at an atrocious hour, and so I don't know if you've actually received them. There are several enclosures, but I think what I'll just do is just read the 3 paragraphs of my one-pager and be done. While it is obvious to me that the Earth is a complex system, in the legal fictions where I live, Ottawa, Ontario, and Canada, there are, for example, no functioning water, terrestrial, or air sheds. The public interest is not proven. Nevertheless, I do support this legally mandated review of Ottawa's land use plan, but to me, faint hope is not a strategy. In the past, I've appealed this land use plan 4 times to the Ontario Municipal Board. Please find enclosed a PDF of those appeals. That just gives you a timeline. To this date, it continues to mystify me that we have no green space master plan and other master plans to balance the current hegemony of the transportation infrastructure master plans. Given the creation of the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, along with many other jurisdictional changes, I sought help and counsel from the Local Planning Appeals Support Center, naturally looking towards a legal remedy. I'm not a lawyer, but I am now of the view that a solution might lie in the direction of human rights, given in the context of a functioning planet that might maintain life. That the Economic Development Department, City of Ottawa, would propose the document Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 as the basis for this comprehensive review of our land use is rather perplexing. However, given the complexity of this matter, I would simply refer interested parties to two further enclosed documents. The first, an introduction to UNESCO's updated recommendation on science and scientific researchers, and the second is Ecosystem Services Toolkit, completing and using ecosystem service assessment to decision-making, an interdisciplinary toolbook for managers and analysts, was produced by the federal task force of the federal, provincial, and territorial governments of Canada. So I wish you good luck in the review of your official plan. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sure you're going to continue to be active in it. Anyone have any questions? Thank you very much, Mr. McNichol. Next up is Alex Cohen, followed by Ted Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Alex Cullen. I'm the chair of the Federation of Citizens Associations Transportation Committee. As you all may know, the Transportation Master Plan, which I have a copy here, is 115 pages plus another 15 pages of schedules, is a supporting document to the official plan. It is the blueprint for planning, developing, and operating the city's walking, cycling, transit, and road networks within the planning horizon. The current TMP dates from 2013 and is based on a number of supporting studies, including an origin destination study, trends in transportation modes, as well as public input at the time. We were looking at the report that came forward with respect to this official work plan, and we were disconcerted to find within it that on page 11, the following language. A partial update of the Transportation Master Plan will also be undertaken. Partial. This TMP Light will be a refresh of the 2013 TMP in order to update transit, road, cycling, and pedestrian projects, costing, affordability, and prioritization. We will be based on the existing transit network, including Stage 1 and Stage 2 LRT, and the existing road, cycling, and pedestrian networks. The planning horizon 2031, travel patterns, model, and urban boundary will not be updated, and there will be no significant changes to policies, mode share targets, or list of planned projects. The completion of the new master plans will occur after the official plan is completed. So this means that there will not be a full TMP review as part of the official plan process. Yet this is a supporting document that outlines the networks, the infrastructure to support the OP goals and objectives. This means that there's no update on the travel pattern despite LRT. The reason that was given to us back in 2017 when we conducted a full review of the TMP and presented before Transportation Committee, and we're told at the time that an update would not happen in 2017 because we would wait for the LRT and an origin destination study would be required due to the impact of the LRT on travel patterns. The statement in the report says there will be no significant changes to policies, modal share targets, or list of planned projects, despite the development of a new OP. So we know the OP work plan will cover growth projections to 2046, expansion criteria, employment lands, new housing, neighborhood planning, urban design, mobility. Given these topics and the impact LRT will have in Ottawa, it is hard to imagine all this not having an impact on your current TMP. How can one construct the expansion of our city without considering the transportation linkages? How can that change the list of planned projects? As well, there are policy implications that need to be considered. How well did the 2013 TMP achieve its objectives? While there's been progress in meeting walking and cycling modal share targets, Ottawa has been regressing, not progressing, in terms of its transit modal share target, as transit ridership has fallen from 103.5 million rides in 2011 to 97 million rides in 2018. We hope for better, but we're far away from 2011 despite population and employment growth. Will the review here provide direction on how to better develop transit policies, service, pricing, etc., to enable the city to better meet its target? Won't the LRT change travel patterns and affect future road projects? The current road project list from the 2013 TMP should be reviewed for relevancy, given how old this list is and the impact of the LRT. The 2013 LRT covers LRT1, or TMP rather, covers LRT1, LRT2, but does not speak to the sequencing of extending LRT to Canada, Barrhaven, Riverside South, or possibly connecting to Gatineau. How can one develop an official plan for future growth without identifying these extensions? It's mobility. What about the implication of development charges in the new growth areas? How can one calculate these if the transportation component is out of date? What about traffic demand management policies that will incent transit travel, such as parking, congestion charges, etc.? There are transportation demand management policies in place in other jurisdictions that should be examined here in Ottawa. What are the trends for vehicle use, given Uber, Lyft, Amazon, driverless cars, etc.? A review of changing technology should be part of any plan to look to 2036. So our ask here, as I come to the conclusion, that statement that there should be a TMP light and simply a refresh of the 2013 TMP with no looking at the policies, updating, what have you, is inadequate if you're doing a complete official plan. The two go hand in hand. So what we're suggesting is you should be doing a full TMP review as part of the official plan process.
Thank you, Alex. And as I said in my email to you, you are right. Mr. Willis is going to respond to you.
Yeah.
Right, you haven't had that. You should save that, Alice, because we haven't always agreed, but we certainly did in that. Mr. Willis?
Madam Chair, as long as it's in the minutes, I'm happy.
It's in the calendar. Madam Chair, Mr. Cullen is correct. That statement in the report, I apologize to committee, is a very outdated statement that was a concept at one point in time. We would do a two-stage update during this term of council to the transportation plan, an immediate short-term transportation light, and a more comprehensive review. That thinking is out of date, and the matter will come before Transportation Committee. There will be a work plan for a transportation master plan update to the Transportation Committee, and that information in the report, please disregard it. It is not correct.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
But thank you for raising it, and thank you for coming out today. Hang on a sec. I just want to have a look at where I am in motions here. Okay. Ted Phillips. Are you here, Ted? Oh, there you are. Here he comes. No.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome, Ted.
I usually like to speak to Planning Committee from the heart, but sometimes I get a little flustered, so I wrote down my thoughts, and hopefully I can get through them without sounding like I'm reading too much. First of all, I'd like to pass on my condolences to you, Councillor Harder. I know Mr. Schoenberg was a close personal friend of yours, and I think he would be interested in the discussion we're having today about Beyond 2036, because he, like you, was a visionary and always looking to plan for the future. So he's someone that our community will miss. So I just thought I would say that.
Thank you.
Secondly, I'd like to acknowledge that I wish Councillor Leeper was here, because even though I don't always agree with his views on things, nor some of the other speakers, I think that there's a lot of things contained in the staff report today that are exciting and opportunities for his input, and I look forward to him coming back to Council to be able to share those views, because it's always a lively conversation we have. So I wish him all the best in a speedy return to the city. I'd like to start my presentation by thanking you, the previous you, Chair Harder,
the previous members of Planning Committee and Council that passed Beyond 2036 in 2016. I've never been so excited as when I listened to Steve Willis at the opening remarks of the kickoff, as I was invited to participate as Mr. Johannes and others in the founders group or whatever it was called at that as part of the 2036 process. It was very exciting to hear him talk about, for the first time in this community, a city that would grow to 2 to 3 million people. That group was made up of CEOs of hospitals, universities, colleges, airports, business leaders, as well as many people from social service agencies and committees and community associations. I got the impression that we were all very excited at Mr. Willis's comments and an opportunity to start a new path looking to move the City of Ottawa forward and to build this city. There was so much excitement in the air. I relayed that excitement to many of you immediately following the first meeting. For far too long, I think we've heard from a few groups that we can never change the boundary, we can never look at expanding the boundary, but God forbid we look at intensification. And I think that through the staff report that's identified here, Mr. Willis is proposing to do both. And I look forward to the opportunity to engage with community associations and other people to talk about how we complete the existing communities and the work that's required to do that. I make no apologies that while I live in Ottawa, I want my children to have a place to be able to buy in Ottawa, one that they can afford. When I purchased my home 15 years ago, I paid about $220,000 for it. I would find it hard to buy that house today on one income, a situation that I suspect many of you are already in the same situation. A 1,400 square foot townhouse in suburbia now costs over $300,000. To raise a family, it's possible, but we don't have the same opportunity that many of you had years ago. The thought of having to pay $1 million for a condo downtown is also not very practical. So I think we have to look at an affordable means to grow this city and look for opportunities for our children to live in. We need to work with the existing communities, as was mentioned by Ms. Perry and others, to see how much intensification they will support, both urban and suburban, and we need to plan where we will go from here. The staff report speaks to this. We have engaged with staff for months now on a development charge bylaw. They're calling it an interim development charge bylaw. One of the frustrations that we have is that we see infrastructure that needs to be planned, that we all want to plan, but we have no money to pay for it. And so that is an issue that needs to be addressed by committee and council as well. A way to fund whatever it is that we need to build. And God forbid I support something that former Councillor Cullen said, but I also share some of his concerns about funding and building this city. Please don't put that in the record. I support the resolutions put forward for the city to be able to look beyond 20 years. This city has a very sophisticated planning track record. We have very capable people, and I encourage the city to be able to look at infrastructure and other issues to take this to 2 million people and beyond. Finally, in closing, I would like to thank staff for preparing this report and the staff report, which together, I believe, outlines many of the recommendations that are required. Discussion of ideas like food to table and affordable housing will be important parts of discussion as we bring forward the next official plan. Happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Anyone have any questions? No? You know what? Thank you very much. Good. The presentation we saw this morning, is that going to be available, is that going to be presented, if you will, on March the 4th?
Joe Barrett will be speaking on March the 4th, and he will be giving probably a similar presentation, not the exact same one, but...
Because I think it's important, because I'm going to tell you something. That's the end of our speakers. But I can tell you that one thing that I find absent today, we have a lot of people here, but there's not a lot of excitement. And I'm grossly disappointed by that. Grossly disappointed by that. This is the most exciting thing happening in this city. It's planning our future. My grandchildren's future, their grandchildren's future. Okay? My time, I mean, I'm an older person now. I'm going to contribute to this. But it's their ideas that we want. I want my grandchildren thinking about what their Ottawa looks like. I want them talking about what we can do better. I want them talking about where they're going to go to school and what the opportunities that they're going to have that will encourage them to stay in Ottawa. Okay? I want ideas about how we can benefit from the major resource we have, which is something we don't usually talk about, which is the city of Toronto. God knows on most days we don't like them, let alone love them. But they're key to the future success of this city. And I think, and I said this at council last week, we do not talk about economic development enough. And I think that we need to be leaders in this. I mean, we let Invest Ottawa certainly play a role, but not where we should. We have to stop being complacent. Why are you not excited? Sheila, you're probably the most excited. Ted, I mean, I know you're not normally excited, but that was kind of enthusiastic for you. The bottom line is, I got a lot of people out here. Is anybody excited? Is anybody breathing? Okay? But really, I mean, do you intend to be part of the process? Because really, I mean, I feel like I'm at some kind of a wake. You know, I don't know what's going on. I don't know whether you're grasping how vitally important. This is the Grabeur report of right now. We keep talking about that from the 50s. This is Mr. Willis's mark on this city, leading us. He'll say it's not. He is the leader. He will be the new Grabeur. Okay? You will be. Okay? And 50 years from now, I hope people think, boy, that guy was smart, and he had really smart people working with him, because you do. And you know what? People that came to speak today, whether we agree with them or not, they care about this city. We have an opportunity to be a global leader. We are already doing that, and most of you don't have a clue about it. And we're doing it right here in Ottawa. People around the world know that we have a test bed that is unique in the freaking world, okay, on more than one level. We're going to tell you more about that in March. We've been kind of telling you about it for 2 years, but nobody's been paying attention. I want people to wake up. I want people to get engaged. And I told the staff this morning, I don't know what your plans are for connecting with people this way, but about 5 years ago, when we engaged the public in building a livable Ottawa, we were excited by the fact that 3,000 people contributed online. That's peanuts. In the 2014 election, those of us that were there know that this played nary a thing, really. Now, it is everything. This is the tool to how we will get people engaged from the time they're a little kid, from the classes in school with the whiteboards, to the grandparents who are in the seniors' homes, to the people working in places, to the people in the public service, to the people that will say, why should I move to Ottawa? Why should I choose it? And like I said to the mayor after Joe's presentation this morning, we're going to have to not have a box that we're going to have to stand in. Our sandbox is going to have to be fluid. So please get excited about it, because if you're not going to, quite frankly, we might as well do a refresh, not a redo, and we need a redo. It's long overdue. I forget, Rick, who's missing now, said to me, this is my third total new one in his elected life. Now, he's been elected for over 30 years or something like that. So, but the bottom line is we've got to get this right, okay? Because we're going to go from being the 5th largest city in Canada to maybe the 10th largest city in Canada if we're not smart about it. And that takes options and choices away from you. So I had no intention of speaking, but as those of you that have known me for a while knows, when provoked or poked, I tend to absolutely be honest. So please get excited. I'm counting on the councillors, all the councillors we'll have this conversation with, to really lead in your communities. Get your people excited and motivated and contributing. We want big box thinking. And because you know what? No idea is a bad idea until it is. Mr. Willis, would you like to say anything?
First, Madam Chair, thank you for the compliments to me and my team. They do a vast amount of work, and I will absolutely resist being compared to Jacques Rébert, because Jacques Rébert and Mackenzie King wrote that plan in a boardroom without talking to anyone, and that is absolutely not our style. We want significant public engagement and participation in this process. This is not going to be written in a back room by two people. So I will resist that comparison. Secondly, I welcome the suggestions we had. Ms. Perry's suggestion about building this on neighborhoods she knows, I agree with her 100%. I absolutely believe we can change the words in this slide on the screen to talk about neighborhoods in this context. I really believe in that, and so does the team, so we will do that. I am really looking forward to talking to people in Ottawa about this plan. The team is very anxious. We really do want to hear. We want to hear from people we don't usually hear from. We want to hear people in different formats, and we're going to be reaching out there, but we really do need council's help. We need your help reaching out to your communities, and that's where we're going to provide you engagement packages. So I'm excited.
Maybe we should have had this conversation earlier today. Thank you. So we actually have councillors that have questions and et cetera. First is Councillor Dudas. So just give me a show of hands. I know that I have Councillor Kavanagh, Councillor Blais, Councillor Gower. I didn't even see you come in. Okay, so just hang on a second, okay, before we get going. So Dudas, Kavanagh, El-Shantari, Blais, who was right up? Gower, Menard. Is that it? Councillor McKenney? No? Anybody else? No? Okay. Oh. See, I knew if I asked long enough. All right. Councillor Dudas.
So I just want to say I'm incredibly excited. And if we can set the bar, because when people were filling out the survey for whether the city should opt in or out for cannabis retail, it was 23,000 people filled out that survey. So we should have more than that. We should aim for far more than that. So anyway, sorry, getting back to my question. I have two questions quickly. I just wanted to know how you will be applying the information that was collected through the Beyond 2036 report, as well as the upcoming public consultations to the OP process.
We will be using a variety of mechanisms. Our comm staff are working very hard on a social media strategy for us, so that we will be using these things a lot. That will form the basis of a lot of what we will be doing this time around. We'll also be doing the standard sort of thing where we will be posting our discussion papers on our project webpage, and that there will be an online survey form, and that survey form allows people, well, the first questions are general. They ask people, what are the most important things in your neighborhood for you, and listing all the things that are important to livability, and asking them to rank and say, how does your neighborhood doing? Do you have all of these things that you need? And then we ask similar questions about the city for them. How is the city operating for you? What are the most important things to you? What do you see as issues that you think need improving on? And then in terms of the things that we've listed, we leave open-ended questions for them to fill in the blank if there's something that we've missed in terms of the answers offered, because we want to really, part of what we're doing with these first wave of discussion papers is asking people about these key challenges that we see that we're facing, but we want to hear from the public about things that we've perhaps missed. We want to hear about what their challenges are for them, and offering them the opportunity to tell us those things.
No, that's great. And I think that part of getting people excited is knowing that when we're asking them for their input and they come back with something exciting and they come back with something aspirational and maybe pushing the envelope and maybe taking a little bit of investment, hint, hint, that we're willing to look at that as a very viable option, because we don't want to be the town that fun forgot. And one more quick question. I just wanted to know what will be the big differences between our current official plan and the new OP.
That's an excellent question, Councillor. I think I was thinking of a couple points about this last night. By the end of the planning period in this new plan, the 25 years out, we're probably going to be at that point, depending on market preferences, depending on the type of housing people want to buy or rent, that we'll probably have at least the same amount of intensification as new build, if not slightly higher. So more and more emphasis on intensification. And that intensification at the end of 25 years is going to show up in areas not just in the core of the city, it's going to show up in the suburban communities as well, in and around the town centers that we have been trying to build. And those town centers will become much more meaningful. Chair Harder talks about downtown Barrhaven now. I would expect you to be talking about downtown Orleans, and I think downtown Canada is something people feel some identification with. That will become for real. I think we want to address these issues of mode shift and ridership changes, so we need to enable it in some of our land use policies. So as we talk about the complete mobility package, Mr. Cullen made some really good points there about what things are changing. We have to anticipate that and build that in. We want a more sophisticated urban design strategy in this plan than we have today. We have a very rudimentary one. We want a more sophisticated one. Our staff do a great job accomplishing a lot, but we think we can take it to a new level. We want to embed as a fundamental value public health in this plan, and that is so highly linked to environment and climate. Those things are all actually tied together, and resiliency of our community on health and climate perspective is a key part of this, and we see that. And finally, we've never had an official plan that had an economic development strategy in it. They were always totally separate things. Now we actually want them to be actually one thing, so it's together. So if we got those 5 things accomplished, I'd think that's success for us.
Perfect. And Councillor Kavanagh has kindly said okay to Councillor El-Shantiri going ahead of her because he has to leave to go to a Conservation Authority meeting. Councillor El-Shantiri?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both, Councillor Gower and Kavanagh, for letting me go. Mr. Willis, you mentioned earlier about injecting the villages or the rural villages, and so we can have our parents stay in those villages. And as you know, this new provincial government, we still call them the provincial government, talking about cutting the red tapes. The only way we can expand and make the rural villages livable and affordable is by changing some of the service requirement and provincial policy statement. Have you had this, and I know you did, but are you going to continue that discussion to be able to make those soon? Because we want to get excited as much as Jan Harder does, but we want it in a rural area.
Councillor, I'll start with one of the first things I did when I got on this job was spend time with those of you in the rural areas to talk with rural communities, maybe one of the areas I didn't have as much experience before I took the job, about what is their future and what do they think is at risk. And the reality is we have villages and hamlets that have lost their schools, lost their banks, lost other amenities, and they're trying to find their place. And what we need to do is revitalize those communities and ensure that they're there, because they're an important part of our fabric. And the servicing issue you mentioned is not an issue just in Ottawa. When I talk to my counterparts across Ontario, if you go to the areas outside the Toronto area with villages and hamlets, exact same problem. And we collectively, among municipal governments and planning leads in different municipalities, are saying to the province, it's time to update the regulations. One of the unintended consequences of your regulations is you are making it very hard for multifamily housing in villages that could contemplate a retirement home. And that jeopardizes the vitality of those communities, and it has to change. So absolutely, it's part of what we intend to do. It is not something that's totally within our control. We need to get the province's attention to this issue, and I can assure you I'm working with my counterparts in other municipalities to do that.
And if there's anything we can do on our part to help with this process, we would like to get involved. As you heard from Minister of Municipal Affairs, he's willing to review those recommendations you come up with, but nevertheless, we need to keep the pressure on him to work together. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much. I don't think you'll be surprised by my question. I've been asking the same question in regards to the recent draft budget reports, and that's asking about the gender lens. What thought has been given to a gender lens on the official plan? This is something that's very, very important. And don't think of it as something isolated. This isn't something that's just about women. This is actually about economic development, because I believe we're missing a lot of potential because
if we don't put a gender lens, we won't see a very, very strong part of our workforce if we don't have facilities, if we don't plan for these things in the future, such as childcare, and quite frankly, we're going to have to think more about seniors' care as well. These are all tied in terms of the services that we make sure are available. I also want to mention that the climate change lens is also not mutually exclusive here as well. But I just wanted to bring that into light. I know when I moved into Ottawa many, many years ago, I found it very difficult as a young mother to integrate, to get to know the community. I want to know that if in the future that as families come in here, that they can integrate really quickly, they can find services quickly, that this is a place that is welcoming, because we do need more immigrants, we do need more families, and we have to think in terms of what makes them very welcome, and the gender lens is crucial. So I'd like your comment. Thank you.
So, Councillor, thanks for that question. Through you, Chair. The Councillor's question, I anticipated the Councillor's question because I was listening at the last Council meeting. I have asked some of my staff in our business services group to look at what other municipalities are doing in terms of gender lens applications to land use planning, so they're doing that work, which will assist our team. I see things as such as if you, as our representative on this issue, are willing and hosting a workshop or a roundtable specifically on that issue, and this is no dispute. It is a key consideration, and we can easily implement it through the process as something that we are looking at.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Blais, followed by Councillor Gower.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and I might not sound excited, but I'm very excited too. And without putting any pressure, Mr. Willis, I do think Councillor Harder is right that this has the potential, and we hope that it will turn out to be a very transformational plan that will guide the city for many decades to come. And as a result, getting it done is very important. The recommendation in the report has the end of 2021 for the work to be complete, which means the discussion amongst elected officials likely to happen in 2022. Something else happens in 2022 which politicizes everything. And so I'm wondering from your perspective what it would take to accelerate the timing so that politicization isn't as big a factor in something that is as important and long term as the kind of plan you're proposing.
And Madam Chair, the Councillor's concerns are not unique to just Councillor Blais. I think I've heard from a very large proportion of Council in the last little while the concern, because I think people understand that there's a linkage between the foundational elements of the official plan, the transportation and infrastructure master plans, the development charges study, that if what they hear, what I've been told by councillors is that one of the large issues raised in this last municipal election was is infrastructure keeping up with everything else? And so in order to address that question, the motion, one of the motions before you that Councillor Vice Chair Tierney introduced does talk about breaking the process into two parts so that we do the key foundational elements that support those other studies earlier, get it done, and then we do some of our housekeeping work that we want to do in terms of making the document easier to read, easier to use, easier to access online, better quality. Some of the work that we can do, some work we know we need to do in terms of what we call modernizing policy can come as a second stage. But we get that foundational work done, and that staff feel the timeline crunch on this, but we also know that a lot of things are depending on it. So the motion that Vice Chair Tierney introduced, I believe, is a valid compromise where we break the OP into two pieces. Now, I must say, one of the things you lose if we do adopt in two pieces is the ability to make that a 10-year adoption free from requirement for review. But a city as large as Ottawa that grows as fast as Ottawa, I can't imagine any council wishing two councils in a row would sit and not want to review the status of their official plan. So that Section 26 provision of the Planning Act does exist, but I'm not sure we would ever be using it anyhow. So, but you do lose that if you adopt in two pieces. But I understand the concerns. You and others have raised it. We will adapt our process accordingly, and that's why we contemplate bringing back a revised two-step schedule to you.
So thank you very much for that. So let's presume for a moment that Councillor Tierney introduces that motion and it's successful. By how much does that accelerate, or by how much potential does that accelerate the completion of the work and the presentation of a plan? So could such a plan in that scenario, and potentially with the injection of additional funding, could that be contemplated by the end of 2020?
There are some real limiting factors in our ability to get done by the end of 2020, but we are confident the first quarter of 2021 we can get that first part one of the foundational growth management provisions. You know, we are dependent on the release of the next tranche of census data, which we will not have till later this year. Till November is the earliest date we'll see it, if Statistics Canada releases it on time. And then we need to hold a Section 26 meeting to adopt, to give proper notice under the Planning Act, to notify the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and we need to do the evaluations, technical work behind the scenes. So we're prepared to do everything we can to get it to that quarter one. We understand the timelines. End of 2020, we don't believe we can do, but we can get it that first part, significant part, first quarter 2021.
And for the early 2021 scenario, what would it take to ensure that the TMP and the IMP are done in a time frame to allow for that plan to take place in 21, and a DC bylaw that coordinates everything together to be well thought out and expressed properly, etc.?
So we'll be working on the population projections and try to land them as quickly as we can. It is dependent on the census release of data and other work that we need to do. That will feed the infrastructure and transportation master plans, and I think by getting them by quarter one of 2021, that will allow them the certainty, if Council adopts our recommendations on growth management at that point, the certainty they need to do to make those decisions. There's other policy work in both of those plans. For example, in the infrastructure master plan, we need to do some updates to our approach on stormwater management because of climate change impacts. That work there's nothing stopping that work from starting this year. It's just some of the servicing extension issues that would have to happen. So certainly appreciate the concern. Work plans will be brought forward to Transportation Committee for the TMP, and we will bring a work plan for the Infrastructure Master Plan here for your review and further discussion in detail.
Thank you for now, Madam Chair.
Councillor Keller.
All right, a quick comment and a quick question. There's an excellent report, and I've already sent it to some community members and encouraged them to read it. My encouragement to you would be to go beyond livable as our goal. Be bolder. I would like cities like Bordeaux and Austin and Manchester to look to us in 50 years as a leader, and I think livable is not strong enough for where we need to be as a city. So a suggestion. My question is around Gatineau. How do you plan to interface with Gatineau? It's clear throughout the report that it's an Ottawa-Gatineau region, that we need their cooperation, we need to work together. I'm curious perhaps where they are in their official plan processes or whatever their equivalent would be, and how do you plan to interface with their leaders to make sure we are working hand in hand to grow our community?
Madam Chair, it's an excellent question. We have been reaching out to our counterparts in Gatineau for the last year, and we've invited them to participate in a number of these sessions. They are very preoccupied right now with a number of mandated provincial planning exercises as a result of their major flooding incidents and on a region. And the Ville de Gatineau has both a local and a regional planning role. So they're good partners. They are very busy, but we are finding ways. Mr. Smith and I had a meeting very recently, for example, with the head of economic development for Ville de Gatineau. We've advanced a framework for some joint initiatives. We will do the same on environmental issues with the Ville de Gatineau. Mr. Manconi has regular conversations with his counterparts on the transportation file. So we are working on many different levels as well. And they're always welcome at the table for these stakeholder groups. We certainly do extend the invites because they are a valuable partner to us.
Merci.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. And next up is Councillor Menard, followed by Councillor Shirelli and Councillor McKenney.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report. I'm I am also excited about the prospect and what we can contribute towards this in the next little while. I just have a couple of comments. One is around the title that we've got up here. I think that could be more exciting. The most livable mid-sized city in North America doesn't scream exciting to me. I think, and if you're open to the change, take out that mid-sized city. The most livable city in North America seems like an aspirational goal we should be trying to achieve. I think get rid of that mid-sized piece. And there's not, I think livability, you could talk about a city that's not a gigantic city that would probably be more livable because it's not so huge. So I think if we can, just to take that back, it'd be nice to change that title. On the from Pide's perspective on the urban boundary question of the OP, what place do we start from for that? Because that's going to be a major issue in the next OP, of course, is do we expand the urban boundary? By how much? So from our starting point right now, what is Pide's position on where the urban boundary sits?
So, Madam Chair, first of all, on the first point, we had a ferocious internal debate about whether midsize was in that title or not. Mr. Migueles would agree with you entirely. He's not here today. I wish he was. He's taking some well-deserved break. But like many, there's agreement that we shouldn't be limiting ourselves. So I think there's an openness to deleting those two words. On the urban boundary review, I'm going to be really clear about this. I am not going to tell you today what we think because we don't have the data yet to know what we need. So I can't today tell you whether we will or will not have a need for an urban expansion. We may very well, we may not. One of the things that we will be doing is the population and employment projections over the planning horizon. It's a very regimented process that the province sets to us that sort of establishes our growth. We will then look at how much growth can be accommodated through intensification within the existing urban boundary and what those opportunities are. And we've seen lots of good examples lately of different types of intensification, whether low-scale, small, gentle intensification, redevelopment of mall sites, those sorts of things. And if that growth that can't be accommodated, or if we have issues with housing choice and affordability and need more variety of different choices, that's another overlay onto this. There may be a need for an urban boundary expansion, but I can't tell you today whether that's here or not. We need the data to tell.
Okay, I do appreciate that answer. I just think when we expand the urban boundary, we're putting more pressure on our tax base, of course. There's more infrastructure to maintain, and of course the effect on the environment is a difficult one. And when we're talking about livability, one of the core concepts that emerges of livability is sustainability. That factor across all, whether it be within our budget, our financial sustainability, or with our actual environmental sustainability. So, I think to take that in perspective on the livability piece with the urban boundary expansion, I think is important. Thank you so much for the presentation today. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thanks. Really good questions, and thanks for raising that point as well, because one of the things that in the presentation, as maybe people skip by, but I think I heard Ms. Perry talk about it as well, was about complete communities. And what does that really mean? Complete neighborhoods. What does that really mean? And would that have an influence on whether there's a change in rounding out an area that would also be smart for the city to be looking at investing in? I think that's one thing we haven't talked about today is smart. What does a smart city look like? And for yourself, they're always talking about transit and that and the type of transit and the cost of transit and that sort of thing. I mean, that could be part of your smart contribution. Many factors will come into play. We're at the beginning of this, right? So I think sustainable, absolutely, but there'll be other ways of, okay, if it doesn't require any more investment in infrastructure to sustain that, is that smart? Is that complete a community? It's a big discussion. We've got lots of time to do it. And I think that while staff are going to have their, which they do have a work plan, I think that we will be almost the Crayola to the work plan, okay? And at the end of this, I'm going to tell you something very exciting that is one of my initiatives, and I hope that it's kind of like a challenge to all of you. I think we're going to Councillor Shirelli and then Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're going to be the kids trying to color inside the lines. Right, that's
I don't care if you stay inside the sandbox. You want to pull in some stuff from outside. It's a windy day.
Okay. So what I want to say is, when we set goals that get achieved, people will quickly forget about the goals, and they don't need to get mentioned anymore. So when the Greville plan came in, one of the main goals of that plan was to prevent ribbon development in the capital region, right? When the Greville plan came in, one of the main goals of the plan was to prevent ribbon development in the city. So prevent areas of poor maintenance, low income, encircled by newer, more trendy neighborhoods, encircled by, so it would just continue like that. It succeeded so well that no one even mentions it anymore, right? So it actually, when we achieve successes in these plans, people tend to forget there was even a goal. And this is actually my third major refresh plan. Yeah. And I wasn't around for the Greville plan. Okay, good. So one of the things I hear from people, though, I heard as we were talking to people in some community meetings in our ward, was that they hope that as we aspire to be a more livable city, that we include in that the increasing costs that aspiration causes to basic services like snow clearing, like road quality maintenance, and that kind of thing. You can't. So one example I keep getting thrown at me is when you shrink the size of roads in neighborhoods, that means you must get in there, remove the snow and remove the snowbanks. You can't leave them like you can in other neighborhoods, or cars can't get through, there's impact on emergency services, and the costs go through the roof. So I'm wondering what kind of emphasis they're going to have on cost containment on our basic core services while maintaining or increasing the quality of them.
Madam Chair, it is a very important question. And matter of fact, the motion that Vice Chair Tierney introduced, one of the criteria talks about implications on capital and operating costs, which is something we've looked at capital costs before. We haven't looked at operating costs. It is a consideration. We have a constant process of continual improvement on what we call the infrastructure standards review. We did one round already. We need to do yet another round of that in the next couple of years. We do keep looking at this. We have to kind of measure. In that example, when you set the road impact, there is a trade-off, right? On one side, if the road is narrower, we use less land per hectare to house people. Mm-hmm. We have less. When that road's narrow, when we have to repair it or replace it, it's cheaper to repair or replace. So there are costs on that side. There are also environmental costs, right, of having the larger surface, the urban heat island, the land consumption side of that as well. On the other hand, if it drives the snow clearance costs up considerably, there are these issues. We're also having trouble with, we've been trying to bring housing and communities closer to the streets, but we're losing room for trees in certain areas. Mm-hmm. So we're working, these are tug of wars going on in policy that we are trying to work on. So we're committed to continuing the review. This will be something we have to always work on. There's no fun, this has to be continuous improvement. There is no one thing that ends that discussion.
And secondly, I think getting people interested in the consultation, it's not really reliable to say that just because this is very important, more people are going to be interested. We had the 20,000 plus interested in cannabis and taking part in that. But the second biggest public consultation in terms of volume of people writing into us since I've been here was for that rooftop cow in Orleans, where we got nearly 10,000 people writing in to save the thing. Apparently they weren't aware it wasn't a living being, but they're writing in to save this thing. And our last official plan got a tiny fraction of that. So I think it's important that we realize that it's not based on what we perceive to be important, but it's based on whether you're touching nerves with the public so that they actually are motivated. So what are you going to do on that?
I think as Ms. Reddy said earlier, we are looking at different consultation techniques through this process. We've retained an outside firm to give us some advice on sort of new techniques that we might use. Online presence, digital is very important. We will reach out with you to your communities if there's interest to do this, because I do believe face-to-face has a lot of value. Some people feel more comfortable with this. So absolutely we need to do more time on this, where we will do our very best to reach as many people as we can.
Thank you. Really good answers, really good question. And I think it ties in really well to what Councillor Menard was saying, too, because when you were talking about livability, you might have noticed, if you don't have much of a life, last night I was saying after 10 o'clock at night that on Twitter that I had some of my, because people were talking about, oh, my sidewalk hasn't been done for the second time, and oh, it has to be this and that. And I was saying, I have streets in my ward that have not been plowed once. Okay? And these were in particular around the Minto Rec Center in Half Moon Bay and Stonebridge. And why? Because of the density. Because the roads are so narrow. Okay? Because the land is so expensive, the lots are so small, there is no place to park more than the Honda Civic. Then we put a sidewalk on it. Okay? Then we have no place to toss snow. So as far as cost of snow operations in this city of winter, okay, in the difference between community in Barrhaven built in the later 80s, around Mary Honeywell and St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, and the Half Moon Bay of today, it's 9 times the cost to the city of Ottawa for that. So that's another factor we have to take into consideration, which is one of the driving forces of why, we should almost have like maybe an update for people who weren't here during the 5 years we spent on building better, smarter suburbs, and what we learned from that, but what we still can do more, because they're having huge pressures, for sure. And you know what? I mean, if we try to make the city more livable, it's an enviable goal, the city more affordable, we can do more, right? So it's all of your questions are all tying together, which is where I'm going on this one. I'm going to go over to Councillor McKenney now, and then I'm going back to Councillor Blake after that.
Thank you, Chair. Great discussion this morning, and I'll tell you what would excite me, and I don't get excited very often about official plans, but if our plan included eliminating homelessness at some point in this stage. But I also think that, and I have a question about that, but I also think that when we're considering what type of city we want to be, I've always wondered why we don't aspire to be the healthiest city actually in the world. Healthy, just healthy, the healthiest. We walk the most, we cycle the most, we could have, the best recreation programs, the most trees, the best green space. We've got Gatineau Park. When we talk about the other side of the river, we've got a river running through our city. We could have food security. We could have dozens and dozens of community gardens for folks. We could have trees and all of the pollinators that plants that we need for bees and butterflies, and we could have the least amount of people smoking, the lowest smoking rate. I really do think we could be the healthiest city in the world if that's what we aspire to, and I would like to see that. I would like to see that. If that's our goal, there's so much in that we could do. Some of it small, some of it big, that would lead us to a place where, because where this whole city is taken into account, because we are a large city and we do have struggles in terms of, should my sidewalks get cleared before Councillor Harder's roads? I say yes, she says no, but we can at least have that conversation if we're talking about where do we want to end up, and maybe it is a bit of both, and maybe we do have to build more sidewalks, and we have to make sure that kids get to walk to school safely and start early, and in terms of moving about and staying healthy. But I'll come back to housing, because that's also absolutely significant when we're talking about the healthiest city in the world, and or livable mid-sized city, either one. So housing, we know that we're not going to solve our housing crisis by counting on private development. It's just not going to happen. They're a part of the whole complex puzzle of how we get to reducing and eliminating homelessness. But they are a part of it, and I just wonder if you could walk us through what the next steps are in terms of upzoning, inclusionary zoning. How do we ensure that the private development industry is doing its part through charges, through providing the funding and the resources we need to reduce homelessness?
So, Madam Chair, first I'll start and say the Council will be encouraged that 2 of the first discussion papers released in the official plan, one is on the healthy city and the second is on housing, both of which delve into the very issues the Councillor raised. I'll tell a quick story. One of the first people I met with when I took on this job was Dr. Levy, and he and I both talked about how public health and planning could work much more integrated way, and I'm so pleased that Dr. Etches has taken that idea to a whole new level with us, and that her team is working in quite a collaborative way. She's been here. I believe she may still be behind me. She's here as our partner in doing this project, so we believe in that very strongly, and that is a legacy I would like this plan to leave for us, is on that. On the housing side, as the Councillor rightly said, this is a complex puzzle. There is no one solution that solves it all, but we are bringing forward proposals to Council. It's in our work plan, which will be discussed at a subsequent Council meeting after provided Council approves our budget today, to bring forward an inclusionary zoning study to bring forward recommendations to Council. That will have to be included. We also have our Section 37 tools, which we are already enabled in our existing official plan. We can go further on that. So we will use the land use planning tools we can that are enabled by the province enables us to use, but it alone won't be the only answer. This has to go beyond anything this official plan can do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Blais.
Thanks. And to quote Eli, I'm going to beat this dead horse a little bit more, I think, on the timing. What is the limitation to doing it by the end of 2020? It's as plain spoken as you can make it, Steve.
The timing of the census data, because what we think we're going to see in the census data is that our historic trend may have changed a little bit. We may actually have had more increase in this last round than we would have projected. And if that's the case, it changes the projections from beyond that point, because as the averaging looks at it, we have to contemplate a bigger population growth. That's very significant. So that census data is really important. We have some legislative things we need to do to meet provincial requirements, and we need time to analyze the growth options to put them in front of Council. So it has a lot to do with getting that projection work done and the staff resources we require to do this. Our team is very committed to moving forward, but we do need to go through those, get the data in so we can make evidence-based decisions.
Right. So staff resources. What kind of additional staff resources would be required to accelerate faster than what you've already articulated, keeping in mind the restrictions of the data and the other elements that are not staff resource based?
So, Madam Chair, what we discussed in Councillor Tierney's motion helps us on this is that what I've committing to do is to report back by the end of March with an acceleration plan with the resources we need. And one of the motions proposes a source of funding for those resources. We would come back with a plan, and I do need to sit with my team and actually construct that plan. And we will come back with an acceleration plan.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the motion that you think that he's moved. Because I think that might be something here as well. So let's just go back to what's on the table. The one that you're referring to, what are you saying that it includes? Yeah, but that's the
So it's the motion called Consolidation of Milestone 1 and 2 with Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 report that in the Be It Resolved, it talks about creating one comprehensive document. Excuse me, I'm not correct on that.
Right.
It's the one entitled Ottawa Next Beyond 2036, moved by Councillor Tierney. It's the one that starts, whereas the official plan is a foundational document motion. At the very last portion of that, the second last Be It Resolved, the last two Be It Resolves, the first talks about breaking the official plan into 2 stages so we get the foundational elements done as quickly as possible, with other things that are not time sensitive pushed further back. And then the second, the very last Be It Resolved is that I bring back, with that into Q1, a revised timeline of resourcing plan for your approval. That will require financial resources to support it, and because right now, as you'll see with our budget as it comes forward, our budget is based on our existing staffing resources. It does not have additional planning resources in it, other than we have consulting dollars available to us for the official plan, but we would need additional resources.
Okay, and so you would propose this in, you said March?
By the end of March. I mean, if we can get it done, yeah, we will come back to you with the updated timetable. We do need your permission to start. We do need that approval today if we wish to kick off as we intended. But we will bring an acceleration schedule back based on the 2-part strategy, and we will bring a resourcing strategy to you as well, because as the motions indicate, there's a proposal for a source of funding available to us.
And so that proposal would include the recommendations or options for source of funding?
Absolutely, that we'd be obliged to do.
Wonderful. Thanks very much.
Great, because whether it's from our delegations or whether it's from the councillors around the table or comments we've heard elsewhere, there's a number of variables involved here. Certainly to do this very well because it matters that much. But certainly be cognizant of the fact that we are a 4-year term, and this is the largest piece of work that we will do with regard to our city and its future. So I don't want money to be an obstacle. So we're going to, I know that we've had some conversations about how that can be funded, and I think that we need to further the conversation. I know that Chair Blais, Chair of Transportation, is going to be having conversation about the Transportation Master Plan. It all fits together. It all should be working cohesively. How do we do that? And then I ask you, Mr. Willis, how can you assure us that your staff, especially if we find a way to fund extra staff expertise, how can we be assured that it'll be a matter of plugging in the information you get from census, etc., as opposed to, in the past, from time to time, we've been in situations, many times actually, where the process was, well, we need that piece and we can't go forward on that. So how can we have assurances that it'll be a plug-in as opposed to a, here's what we heard, this is what we promised to come back on, and this is what the census says, and plug that into it so you have that information.
Madam Chair, as indicated, Mr. Smith and I will go back to our teams. We will go construct a acceleration plan. We will give options for funding to do that acceleration plan and present that to you. We hear you loud and clear that there's a time pressure that we get our foundational elements done so that we enable other projects to commence. We understand that. That's the objective, so that our work is done so that the other pieces can begin. We hear you loud and clear.
Whether it be the LRT to Barrhaven and Canada, okay? I mean, we can't just throw it out there as an example, but this is information that we need. I mean, we need the big picture, but for those people that are counting on, myself included, people using transit, the only way that we're going to see our numbers go up significantly is if we give people the transit that deserves their support. Right now, that's not happening. And it's not happening for a number of reasons, but I'm not laying it at the doorstep of Mr. Manconi. Not at all, or his staff, okay? We have a very large city. We have a huge city. And it can't all be dealt with in one. So all I want to know is that we work really, really hard to work with all of our communities, our businesses, our everything, everybody that's engaged, and our neighbors. How do we move forward? And if you need more investment in it to do it, I don't want that to be the reason we can't. So you'll let us know that in March?
Absolutely, Chair.
Okay.
One further question.
Sure.
Are there any limitations to using any surpluses in DC accounts to fund this?
Mr. Mark can correct me if I'm wrong. The Development Charges Act does permit it to use for certain studies that relate to the ultimate deployment of capital infrastructure. So that if one might make an argument, we would probably need to be assured that that would not be appealed should we propose to do that.
So can we provide direction that that's part of your analysis, including the question on appealability for your recommendation in March?
Madam Chair, certainly can do that. We will investigate the legality of that, and if it is feasible and if there are no barriers to do it, we could include it in the bylaw being adopted this spring.
Can you repeat your last line? You make it up.
So, provided that there are no barriers to doing it in the legislation, it is a source that potentially might be used on the argument that this foundational work supports the capital investment work we would be doing down the road. Provided there are no legal barriers, which we need to assess, we could include the draw in the DC bylaw we are adopting in May, provided that's viable.
Okay, good answer. Councillor Menard?
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. And I looked ahead to the budget for this committee as well. And in that budget, it seems like we're allocating for the next several years $500,000 annually within the capital budget towards the development of the OP. So with the discussion that Councillor Blais has commenced here, how does that $500,000 I guess it's new in the capital budget, how does that jive with what we're discussing now at an accelerated time frame? Because I think that goes out to 2024.
So the Deputy City Treasurer could assist me in this, but in the past, the practice has been that Council puts aside money to bring forward any official plan review through the capital budget in the different cycles as they come up. That's anticipated in the long-range financial planning elements. That's where we've traditionally done it. If I understand the question I'm being asked by committee today is, can we go beyond that in order to accelerate it and find sources other than that for this? And I think what the indication I'm getting is looking at non-tax sources, because our budget will be set today, provided, and ultimately if Council approves committee's decision today, we'll have to be looking at non-tax supported.
Okay, but we are already allocating half a million every year for the OP. So this would be in addition to that. That's in the budget now.
That's correct, because the budget that is required to support the technical studies, it's also required to support a fair bit of legal support at the point of ultimate appeals. That's why that budget is set the way it is.
Great. Good question. Okay. So, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone in the audience. So on the motion on Ottawa Next Beyond 2036, one, that Planning Committee recommend Council receive the Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 report, attaches document 1. The Planning Committee recommend that Council approve the work plan for a new City of Ottawa official plan, which is to be completed by the end of 2021. The Planning Committee recommend Council appoint a Councillor Sponsors Group comprising the chairs and vice chairs of Planning and the Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committees to serve as champions for the official plan review project as described in this report. And we have an amendment to that.
All the motions are introduced, but you need to vote on them.
Yeah, but the one to add the chair? Okay. That one is the one that ties into, which is the number for that, guys? Okay. The addition of the chair of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management to the official plan sponsor group. Okay? That's what that one is. Okay, so we have several amendments to go over. Can you just do the therefore be it resolved? Read the Vice Chair, can you just read the intro for the top parts, 25-year planning horizon, and therefore be it resolved of each of them? And for ease, we'll vote on each one, okay, rather than trying to remember them all. No, just the therefore.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just clarifying that. 25-year planning horizon, so therefore be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development to request the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to use his powers under Section 4.5 of the Provincial Policy Statement to pre-authorize the City to complete the official plan on the basis of the 25-year planning horizon, and be it further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the Mayor on behalf of City Council write to local members of provincial legislature to solicit support for Council's request for a longer planning horizon. Be it further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the Planning Committee Chair to proactively seek meetings with Ottawa's political ministers and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs in advance of Council's request to extend the planning horizon to the request by the City Council, and the Chair verbally to report to committee as steps were taken to achieve a longer planning horizon.
Before we vote on that, can I just ask Mr. Willis, yesterday I saw something that your staff did brilliant work on in gathering horizons that other large Ontario cities, large Canadian cities have. I think that would be really good for you to see that.
Yes, Chair, just very quickly, if you compare us to other major cities...
Can you speak up, please?
Yes, sorry. If you compare us to other major cities, Calgary has a 30-year planning horizon and a 60-year planning horizon for major infrastructure. Edmonton is not picking an end date. They're picking a planning horizon of reaching 2 million population. And remember, they're about the same size as we are today. Winnipeg has a 25-year planning horizon. Vancouver has a 20-year planning horizon. And Toronto has a 30-year planning horizon. So it does seem odd that Ottawa is limited right now to 20 years in the provincial policy statement, and there is a mechanism in the PPS for the minister to approve a longer horizon, and that's the basis of the motion. We think we should be treated the same as other big cities.
And just to wrap it up in a nutshell, why exactly that's important to this city, that we get the extension?
Chair, Council this term is faced with some significant commitments to major infrastructure investments, particularly in light rail transit in ultimately phase 3. If you want to deploy and amortize costs through mechanisms like development charges, you need to have a planning horizon that allows you to do that. So this would enable Council to make major infrastructure decisions, not to mention you can't decide to do major trunk infrastructure or transit infrastructure without thinking a long term. Remember the comparison I gave with the Regions Plan, which was a longer planning horizon, by the way. That was a 30-year, right, John? Anyway, it was a longer planning horizon. Okay, so on this motion, is it carried? Carried, thank you. Next one, Vice Chair Tierney? Yeah.
Great. This is just a replacement. It's a technical thing. Therefore, be resolved that document 1 be replaced with the revised version provided and distributed to the committee coordinator.
Okay. Next. What's the title?
So the consolidation of milestone 1 and 2 with the Ottawa Next Beyond 2036 report. Therefore, be resolved that the study titled Ottawa Next Beyond 2036, Document 1, be tabled and amended such that the results of Milestone 1 and 2 be incorporated into this document so that all 3 elements, Beyond 2036, Milestone 1 and Milestone 2, together create one comprehensive document to be presented to Committee and Council for the schedule of November 2019.
Okay.
Therefore, be resolved, I'll just go to the title, Advancing the Review Process. Therefore, be resolved that the task of Milestone 4, as outlined in the report, be realigned so the analysis of the urban land requirements to meet the projected 2046 housing and employment needs and the criteria by which the land was selected comprise of the core task 4. Be it further resolved that the report, which recommends the new land selection criteria, evaluate, provide commentary to the following: locations of financially sustainable over long term from both capital and operating perspective, location that results in complete communities, that the support of the city's investment in light rail, evaluate the locations in the existing built-up areas and the likelihood of achieving the required densities, the age and conditions of required infrastructure transit services mapping, which will produce a capital budget projection to support the housing and employment needs that will be implemented through the life of the plan. Be it further resolved that the revised Task 4 be presented to the Planning Committee and City Council for approval as recommended in June 2020. Be it further resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council allow General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development the authority to break the adoption of the new official plan into 2 stages, that the growth management matters be adopted in Q1 of 2021, and the policy modernization of the remainder of the plan be adopted with the date this term of Council. Be it further resolved, the Planning Committee recommend the Council direct the General Manager of Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development to provide a revised schedule for the official plan review and Planning Committee by the end of Q1 2019.
Okay. Thank you. Last one?
Last
Yes.
one. This is related to the addition of the chairs of the Standing Committees, Environmental Protection, Wastewater Management, and the Official Plan Sponsor Group. Therefore, be resolved that the Planning Committee recommend that Council add the chairs of the Standing Committees for the Environmental Protection, Water, and Wastewater Management to the Council Sponsor Group for the Official Plan of Review.
Okay. 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 Anything else? Any other? Does anyone? Am I missing anything, Mr. Mark? Done everything?
I believe you've caught everything, Madam Chair.
Oh, see? Because I haven't approved it as amended yet, so... Mr. Willis, did you have something to say? No, you're good? All good? So, on this item as amended? Carried. All right. Great. I wanted to... we're 22 minutes away from the witching hour when we normally, well, we never normally do anything, but when we have a plan to stop for lunch. But I'm going to suggest that we continue on with the budget. That's really our only substantive item left. I do have, I am asking that the coffee, etc., be refreshed. And there is a box of chocolate-covered cookies that I have had in my fridge since Christmas. I did not make them. They're decent, though, in case you're starving. Okay? For anyone that's allowed in there. I just want to say, Mr. Willis, before you leave, because that's what I wanted to say, truly fantastic work to you and your team. You have a very large team. We're just at the beginning of the process, and we're all excited now. Okay, so on to more exciting things. So 2019 Draft Operating and Capital Budget Planning Committee. We're going to have a brief Are we having a brief presentation? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going to. Very brief presentation, and then we're going to go to our speakers. Just to give you an idea, no one leave the room if you're on the list. We have Catherine Boucher and Peter Trotscha, Aaron Andrews, Naheed Khan, Raymond Sullivan, Andrea Balfour, and Giselle Bouvier. All right.
Thank you, Chair. Isabel Jasmine, Deputy City Treasurer, and today I'm joined by Shelley Van Buskirk, Director of Housing Services, and Stephen Willis, GM Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development. So I guess I'm doing this. Why isn't that one going down?
Can you figure that out? Perfect. So we'll provide an overview presentation, then public delegations, questions to staff, review of operating capital budgets, motions to amend, and then recommend budget to council. It's okay. So in terms of an overview of the operating budget for planning, the right-of-way, heritage, and urban design, the change over 2018 net number is $736,000, and it's mostly cost of living changes and the reduction in the patio fees. For planning services is a net change of $25,000. There is in there an increase due to cost of living, and it's also offset with increases in fees in that area. The long-range financial planning, net increase of $310,000. That is also cost of living, but there's a one-time $250,000 contribution for building better neighborhoods. And then for building code services, same cost of living increases, and then fees increase to offset it, so there's a net zero. That one is on a cost recovery basis. For affordable housing, you'll see $6.5 million contribution. It's a one-time contribution to capital. There's no capital project that's actually been set up for it. It's just a contribution to the reserves, waiting to see what other funding may come in from other levels of government to figure out what we would be doing with those funds, and Shelley will speak to it a little bit more. But the $6.5 million comes from a tax stabilization, one-time contribution of $3 million. There was a motion in June for sale of land, $2.5 million to be directed to housing, and then also an annual budget contribution of $1 million to supplement that.
So on the planning, infrastructure, and economic development component of this budget, Ms. Van Buskirk will talk about the affordable housing component of it. We did, as the Deputy Treasurer indicated, account for potential contract settlements and changes. The big significant change to our budget, everything is largely a stand-pat budget with inflationary increases. The big change is the $150,000 to increase the Heritage Grant Program for a total budget now of $300,000 a year. This is based on a program review and project take-up, because we understand the incentives we have today are not sufficient. We will be bringing forward further recommendations for criteria on this, but right now we're contemplating $10,000 for small-scale residential projects and $25,000 for large-scale projects, and it will continue to operate as a matching grant. There's also a one-time funding commitment for the continuation of the Building Better Revitalized Neighborhoods project of $250,000, and we will complete the instructions from the previous term of council on the priority neighborhoods, the three that were identified by the last council, and this money will be spent in completing those components.
The $6.5 million in additional funding for new affordable housing development is part of the $15 million investment that the Mayor announced at the tabling of the budget on February 6th. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of Council in regards to this unprecedented capital investment, $10 million of which is new funding. In addition to the surplus lands that we'll make available, we hope to double the amount of units that we're able to approve on its own. It would result in the approval of approximately 125 units. By leveraging other federal and provincial funding, we hope to double that and approve 250 units this year. In regards to the capital budget highlights, you see on the top row the investment in affordable housing at $4.8 million for this year. $4.6 million of that $4.8 million is funding that we received from the Investing in Affordable Housing program, which ran from 2014 to 2020. This program is sunsetting at the end of by fiscal 2020. This $4.6 million is supplemented by $225,000 in funding from the reserve for project contingency and fee relief.
So the other capital components, the first is the land management solution, which is our major IT backbone of all of the development approvals process across the department. The system we're working on today is antiquated and is at the end of its life cycle for support from its vendor. The new system will deal with building code services, planning, right-of-way, and committee of adjustment. We've completed the procurement process for phase 1 of the project, and we anticipate a contract award in Q2 of this year. And the first phase will deal with building code services and replace its systems for managing all of its applications. The final component is the official plan. I think we've talked at length today about that, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to address that. But to questions raised by Councillor Menard earlier, that money goes to primarily public and community engagement, the population employment projections, the GIS information we need to complete the data acquisition we need to do that, employment lens study component, which we need outside consultants for, and legal support in the event of an appeal. The other component is development charges bylaw update, which we're bringing to council in May of this year. That component paying for it for this year comes from the capital budget.
So this just breaks down the funding for the capital projects. It's a relatively small capital budget for this committee, and the most significant portion is for the affordable housing project, $4.6 million coming from the IAH fund, and then the contribution to the land management solutions coming from building codes, also considered the revenue because building codes is covered by revenue. And so that's the most significant portion. 92% is coming from revenue for this capital budget.
The $4.8 million that was mentioned on the previous slide from the Investing in Affordable Housing program, which is sunsetting, will be invested this year in housing subsidies, both rent supplements and housing allowances. Our Ontario Renovates program, which provides grants and low-cost loans to seniors and people with disabilities for accessibility-related modification and minor home repairs. However, in that $4.8 million, there is $1.17 million for new affordable housing development. The 2019 Affordable Housing Funding is subject to development and approval of a capital repair plan. Capital spending plan. We are awaiting details of new federal and provincial funding that we hope to hear post the first budget of this new provincial government. At that time, we will bring that plan to committee and council and talk about what our investments may be. We may allocate money, obviously, through an expression of interest and or a formal RFP process. And we'll also include information on the surplus lands that's both federal, provincial, and city that we'll be including. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we go to questions, I have many speakers. We'll go to speakers. And, okay. First one is Catherine Boucher and Peter Tracha from Somerset West Community Healthcare. Councillor Hubley, you want to, Councillor Hubley? Yeah, I'm going to write your name down. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and members of Planning Committee. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to share our insights on the draft 2019 budget. My name is Catherine Boucher. I'm here with fellow community member Peter Tracha. We're both residents of Somerset Ward and members of something called the Stewards Table at Somerset West Community Health Centre. The table is providing leadership to a project called Building Community Together, which was established to address the rapid development and gentrification of West Centretown and to advocate for the retention and expansion of affordable housing in our area. As I begin, I would like to take a moment to thank the city for the following. Firstly, for obviously the recent announcement of the $15 million commitment to affordable housing. We hold significant gratitude for Council hearing the voices of those in need and their allies. But, and there's a but, we are also concerned, of course, that this is one-time money and would very much like the city to look at ensuring a more secure form of capital funds. Secondly, we want to thank the city for its commitment to identifying publicly owned sites where affordable housing units could be built in close proximity to transit. And on this, I just want to thank Mr. Willis and the team from the multi-departmental group. I don't know who the others are, but they have done a fabulous job, and we really, really look forward to this great opportunity to do this work. We're thrilled to hear, as announced by the mayor at the budget presentation, that one of the sites is in our catchment area on Albert Street, located near Pimsey Station and the site of the future Central Library. This is a very promising commitment, and we urge the city to continue on this trajectory and ensure that this TOD is affordable to those living in poverty in our community. This includes housing for the diversity of our community, including seniors and families with young children. Speaking as a resident of West Centretown, affordable housing is a serious concern for our community. The City of Ottawa more broadly is facing a housing crisis with increasing demands on the shelter system, transitional housing, and limited affordable housing for our neighbors living in poverty. I'm going to turn it over to Peter.
So our community has 40% of its residents making under $20,000 a year and spending in excess of 30%, sometimes 50% of their income on housing. An affordable rent for them...
Could you speak up, sir?
Sorry.
Thank you.
An affordable rent for persons making under $20,000 a year would be $500 a month. But the average rent for our area is $1,133 a month, more than double. Our neighbors are having to make impossible decisions between the necessities of life, like shelter, food, and utilities. For those who are unable to find housing, the situation is dire, very dire. The Forward Family Shelter just closed, and emergency shelters are overflowing as our homeless family population increases. In West Centretown, we are seeing rapid development. Although some of these developments will provide affordable housing, including purpose-built rental housing, the vast majority of new construction projects are aimed at middle and upper-income households. And we are losing affordable rental units at the other end of the pipeline. If we do not invest substantially in affordable housing in our community, the diversity and affordability of our community will be irrevocably changed. So, along with 65 other organizations, networks, and coalitions from across Ottawa, we are calling on the city to address the affordable housing crisis with the following asks. 1. Maintain this $15 million in the final 2019 budget and ensure the following in the development of affordable housing. 2, pass a strong citywide inclusionary zoning bylaw that ensures that 25% of new development is dedicated to affordable housing and places a special emphasis on deeply affordable housing within 1 kilometer of rapid transit stations. 3, ensure that all available government-owned land within 1 kilometer of current future rapid transit stations is used for nonprofit and co-op housing. And 4, create a 2019 to 2022 term of council priority that integrates transit and planning with clear affordable housing targets.
Sir, that's your time. Could you just wrap up, please?
Okay. We just look forward to your leadership and commitment to meeting this most basic and immediate need of our community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Next up, we have Aaron Andrews from Healthy Transportation Coalition, and thank you for your submission. Aaron? Oh, there you are. Hi. Are you set to go? Press the button. Lights on.
Thank you.
Pull it a bit. Pull it. I find that people haven't been speaking very loudly today, so just make sure you speak into the mic as much as possible. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Erin Andrews. I'm from Ottawa, and I'm a member of the Healthy Transportation Coalition. I'm concerned about the housing crisis that Ottawa is facing with only a 1% vacancy rate. Our city should make sure that people living on low incomes have access to affordable housing near rapid transit stations. I grew up in Ottawa, but I went away for university, and moving back to Ottawa for graduate school, it was hard for me to find a place to live. Grad school can be isolating, and it was difficult for me and many of my colleagues to find housing that we could afford that wouldn't isolate us further. I could not afford to live close to my school and work, but I was lucky to find somewhere close to the transitway so that I could still participate in student life. My scholarships and TA positions supported me through my master's, but I struggled to find a good job upon graduation. I'm currently paying much more than the 1/3 of income that's deemed affordable for housing. My rent costs me more than half of my monthly income. I've considered moving further into the suburbs or into a smaller apartment, but the market is worse than it was when I found this place 2 years ago. A smaller apartment farther from my work or from transit would cost me almost as much every month, not to mention the extra hours every day spent on the bus when working 2 or 3 jobs has been necessary at times to make ends meet. People are being forced to make tough choices every day because of the costs of housing and transit in this city, because they are so high. On February 6th, before the budget was tabled, more than 140 people rallied outside this building to demand that the city address the affordable housing crisis. More than 140 people showed up in the snow and in the cold at 9 a.m. on a weekday to demonstrate. This is in addition to the more than 60 organizations that wrote to the city and the mayor, and the 1,600 people who signed a related petition. Residents from every single Ottawa ward, including 246 constituents of the city councillors that are on this committee. We were encouraged by the mayor's draft budget commitment to dedicate $15 million towards building new affordable housing. The planning committee must now act to make this a reality. Specifically, what those 1,600 who signed the petition voiced their support for is that the City of Ottawa pass a strong citywide inclusionary zoning bylaw that ensures... Can I go to the next slide, please? Thank you. That ensures that 25% of new development is dedicated to affordable housing and places a special emphasis on deeply affordable housing within 1 kilometer of rapid transit stations. To ensure that all government-owned land within 1 kilometer of current and future rapid transit stations is used for nonprofit and co-op housing. Can you go to the next? Thanks. To create a 2019 to 2022 term of council priority that integrates transit and planning with clear affordable housing targets, and finally to commit at least $12 million per year of city funding over and above federal and provincial grants to build new affordable housing. These measures are needed to address the housing crisis and to ensure that all residents can access adequate and affordable housing. They're needed to reduce transit poverty by ensuring that those who rely on transit can afford to live near it. And they're required to promote vibrant communities by integrating affordable housing with private housing, avoiding ghettos, and ensuring that everyone can access transit. People who can get around on the bus can go to work, they can go to school or volunteer opportunities, they can access nutritious food and medical professionals, and they can get involved with their communities through recreation, through faith, or other interest groups. The City of Ottawa has an equity and inclusion lens that should be applied in all its areas of work. It is meant to be applied, but it has no teeth. So each of you has to think about what this means for you as members of this committee. We need to make an equitable and inclusive city where affordable housing near rapid transit is prioritized. You have a responsibility to ensure that Ottawa is an equitable and inclusive city. Housing and transit are critical for environmental, social, and economic planning for our city. As the decision makers, you cannot afford to miss this opportunity to invest in our people. Finally, I wanted to thank Councillor Kavanagh, who I don't see.
Right over there.
Hello. For bringing up the gender question about the official plan presentation earlier. And I'd like to know if you and any other councillors who'd be interested would be willing to meet with me and other members of the Healthy Transportation Coalition, possibly some of our organizational members, including the City for All Women's Initiative, and maybe ACORN, to discuss how that lens, how that focus on gender can be applied more broadly.
She's shaking her head like, take it to the bank.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. Anyone have any questions? Councillor Chiarelli.
Okay, as we develop our choices with the budgets that we're going to have over the coming years, I know it's desirable to have housing units near transit. It's also desirable to have a lot more housing units. So I'm wondering if you could have either 10 new housing units away from transit or 7 right beside transit, which would you pick?
That's a very difficult question for me to answer.
It's difficult for me to answer, too. That's why I'm asking you.
I can only represent myself saying this, but I would say I would choose to build 7 more units closer to transit, because there are so many people who rely on transit to get to the very important destinations that I spoke about in my presentation, who don't have the option of using a private vehicle to get around. And if they're too far from transit to make use of that, then they're very limited in what aspects of city life they can participate in. Okay. They may be limited to a very, very small radius.
All right, thank you.
Okay. And late breaking news from Councillor Looper, who is not behaving. He says, it looks like the site plan stuff went through easy peasy. There were rumblings about consultation, but my folks are sophisticated. He said, I wanted to be there to support it. I said, will you relax? I know, it's not in your DNA. I said, how are you? He said, I am excellent. I want to go shovel a bike lane. It's like Groundhog Day, eh? I think my staff changed my email password, which is good. He said, I'll be out of here hopefully tomorrow, then take in a couple of weeks. So talk about that. So I think he's on the road to recovery. Thank you very much for coming out. Nahid Khan from Making Voices Count.
Hello, my name is Nahid Khan, and first of all I will ask that English is not my first language. My English is not that good, and if I make some mistake or anything, please forgive me. My name is Nahid Khan, and I'm here today as a member of Making Voices Count. Making Voices Count work with city decision makers to create a city for all. It is driven by residents, the Coalition of Community Health and Resource Center, City for All Women Initiative, and community partners. I would like to express my gratitude to City Council for committing to $15 million to create more affordable housing. I'm hoping that will reduce the wait time for the social housing and help many single mothers like myself. I am single mother of 4 kids. I have been on the waiting list for 8 years. I currently have 4 people living in 3-bedroom apartment, which I pay full rent. One room is too small to fit even a single size mattress. I share one room with my daughter and have no privacy. My rent went up last year and this year more than previous years. It cost $1,320 monthly. My kids work part-time and go to school full-time. They help pay for part of the rent and have to pay for their bus passes and tuition fees too. The food price has gone up too. I am on ODSP and pay a half of my income for rent and the kids pay the rest. The money left I will pay for food and community pass. I understand community pass price will go up this year. It is so hard to make ends meet. I have to use food bank. I feel very stretched by the end of the every month. And only I know what stretch means. It's like having a small blanket over me in the very cold weather. I struggle to cover my head or my feet. I live in a poverty situation, and poverty causes two things that I know. It causes sacrifices that is sharing room and put your own need aside to put healthy food on the table for my children. And the other thing is fear. What if one of my child lose a job? What if there is something come unexpected in my life? What if there's something I need in health care that is not covered? So my ask is, like, we are not asking for the dream house. We are asking for the houses that me and people like me can live peacefully and fearless life with the family. And I want to feel safe and I want to feel proud Canadian. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to let you know, I only have 1 minute left for you. So summarize what you're going to say, because we do have your submission.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a last-minute change that I decided to co-present. So I'm working with Cowie, and my name is Tonja Ansari, and particularly working on Making Voices Count project. The asks are very clear by the previous speakers. We really want to ensure 15 million capital funding is in the final budget, and also to ensure 25% of new developments is dedicated to affordable housing. Near rapid transit, and make sure it's in the new term of city council priority. As the federal election is coming up, and we committed to work with you to pressure the federal government to provide matching dollars. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor McKenney has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for coming out. It's nice to see you. I wonder if you could just give us a sense of, we've heard about your housing costs and what that means to raising a family and how you're able to cope day to day. Can you couple on and just talk a little bit about the cost to you for getting around the city, whether you drive or take transit or walk? Do you find that difficult to do? I just want to know what those added costs are to transportation, because I believe that outside of housing, that's probably the second most important cost that we can look at in terms of equity. So I just wonder if you could just give us a quick sense of what you would pay to move about for you and your family.
Pay for the,
like, for transit, or how do you get around the city?
Yes, I take bus. I don't have car, and I pay for my own community pass. My children also buy bus pass every month, all of them. And current I pay is like the ODSP pays me like all the half. I pay half from the children money and to have the month go.
So yourself, and you have a community pass? Did I hear you say that?
Community pass, I buy myself.
Okay. Yes. And how much does that cost you?
$43.25, something like that.
And for your kids?
They have an eco pass, $58 something.
And how many kids?
4.
So 58 times 4 plus 43. Mm-hmm. So you're spending about $250 a month just to travel.
Yes.
So 277. She's the mathematician, I guess.
Yeah.
But so that adds a lot onto your cost too. Even though it's an Equipass and it's a community pass, and I understand that it's it's still a bit of a break, but it's still quite a bit of money.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks a lot.
Mr. Kavanaugh?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think this really gives us a reality check of what it's like to get by day and as a single mother with 4 children in your household. It's pretty clear that affordable housing is a big priority, especially with the waiting list. So I'm very grateful that our council is going to make that a priority. I am the special liaison person for gender equity and women's issues. What do you think is probably the biggest issue in terms of as a single mother that you see as your biggest struggle?
Being single mother, as I say, my English not good. I understand simple words. Being a single mother is very, very, very hard. I don't understand your question much of this simple way.
Would you say that housing is probably your biggest problem?
Yes, it is for me because I can't afford the rent.
Mm-hmm. Do you have to deal with child care as well?
Child care, no.
No, not now.
They are over 18, but my religion is joint system.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you very, very much for your presentation. I think it's very helpful.
Thank you for coming out. Okay, next up we have Raymond Sullivan, Executive Director, Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation, followed by Andrea Balfour, or 4.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Ray Sullivan. I'm the Executive Director of CCOC. We are the largest private nonprofit landlord in the City of Ottawa, renting out close to 1,600 affordable homes to 2,500 people in around 50 properties in downtown neighborhoods in Ottawa. I'm also chair of the board of CADCO, which is the only nonprofit development corporation in the City of Ottawa. I'm here to commend you and the rest of council and the mayor in particular on the commitment for $15 million of new funding for housing capital. It's an investment that I and others have been calling for many years. And here's why it's important and why it's important right now. Stephen Willis's slide earlier this morning said it. The shape of the city will change. And LRT is going to be one of the drivers that changes the shape of our city. So we have an opportunity to make sure that that new shape is inclusive and balanced and includes homes for a wide range of incomes. To do this, the city is going to have to deploy a number of tools. Funding for affordable housing is crucial, but it can't be the only tool. Because it's not just about affordable housing, it's about housing affordability. So let's look at how some of those dense new neighborhoods will develop around transit stations. We need inclusionary zoning. We need inclusionary zoning to produce a modest level of affordability, especially where the development includes intensification. And I'm pleased to see the city is taking the initial steps in that direction. But inclusionary zoning is not going to produce deeply affordable or below market rate housing. So we need to prioritize public land near transit to do exactly that, so that nonprofit and co-op developers can create that below market housing that would otherwise not exist. And again, I commend the city for efforts in identifying and exploring how that land can be used for affordable housing. But free land alone is not enough to create deeply affordable housing for people with low incomes. And that's where this $15 million investment is crucial, and hopefully any money that comes from the federal provincial governments that can be matched to that. So using these tools together to build new dense communities near transit, what's it going to produce? Well, mostly it's going to produce market rate homes, and that's okay. You know, we need our private sector developers who have the capital and the expertise to ensure that growth. But it's also going to create some modestly affordable market rate homes, also some nonprofit housing at average or slightly below average market rents, and some more deeply affordable housing. And what we've got when we put those things together is a balanced and inclusive neighborhood that is tilted more toward transit users. And this is what we need to create, not just along the new LRT line, but also along the existing line and along the bus rapid transit network. One final piece of the puzzle to make sure we're using that $15 million most strategically and to greatest effect is a fantastic opportunity that we have right now in this term of council. And we heard some of it earlier this morning. It's an opportunity to take a whole-of-city approach to address housing affordability. I'm very excited, Madam Chair, about the official plan review. It's a fantastic opportunity for us all in this city. Coupling that with the transportation master plan, I'm glad to see it's going to be a more complete review. And very quickly this spring, the refresh of the 10-year plan on housing and homelessness that city staff are undertaking. And I and my affordable housing colleagues are very excited to work with Shelley Van Buskirk and her team to expand our work in that area. The important thing is to connect those dots, because all of those decisions in each of those areas are going to have an impact on housing affordability across the city. So we are also, as many others have today, asking you to make affordable housing near transit a term of council priority, so the policy direction is there to connect those things. And if I have just one more minute, I want to answer Councillor Shirelli's question from earlier this morning about affordable housing units away from transit or closer to transit unit. Increasingly, researchers who look at affordable housing are not just looking at housing costs, they're combining housing and transportation costs. So yes, that home in Rockland might cost you $50,000 less to buy, but suddenly you're going to need to become a two-car family and maintain two vehicles. And when you add those costs together, it starts to change those decisions. So the decisions that we make about how we rezone and how we plan our transportation infrastructure are also decisions that we're making about where housing becomes affordable, less affordable, or more affordable. So I encourage you to connect those dots with us and build that city together.
Great comments. Thank you very much. Councillor Menard has a question.
Thanks very much,
and
Madam Chair.
Gower.
Thanks for your presentation, Mr. Sullivan. I wanted to talk to you about the nature of the housing funding in this budget. It's largely one-time funding. And I don't know if there's a better expert in the room than you to explain to us how pressure is only going to increase on the housing sector as we wind down those social operating agreements at the federal, provincial level. Can you explain what kind of pressure is coming on affordable housing in the next decade or so that we'll need to address, and why one-time funding isn't really enough to start addressing that?
Yeah, one-time funding for 2019, of course, is a good start, but we have to look ahead toward the rest of the term of council and beyond. And for the past 4 or 5 years, we've largely relied on funding from the federal and provincial government to create new affordable housing. We don't know going forward what will be there. So as we saw in the earlier budget presentation from staff, there's less than $5 million available in the Investing in Affordable Housing Fund from the federal provincial government. Much of that is tied up in past commitments that are not going to create new housing, but they do create new affordable opportunities for some households. But that program itself is set to decline over the next couple of years as the federal government puts a greater priority on portable housing benefits delivered directly to households rather than creating new housing supply. And in a city like Ottawa, with a very low vacancy rate, it's a supply problem that we have. So we have to make sure that there are supply answers in that solution. So the pressure is very much on, and it's important that we can't necessarily rely on senior orders of government, and we have to see what we can do as a community to step up.
Councillor Gower.
Thanks for your presentation, Ray. I'm hearing three themes from all the speakers. One is the investment that you see in this year's budget is good, but needs to continue. Attention to inclusionary zoning, attention to transit as an important consideration for where we're locating. I've known you for 20 years, and you've seen how the city has made investments or distributed money. Where do you see other opportunities beyond those big three themes of how we can spend money smarter when we're investing in building housing and housing affordability?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Gower. It's not just a question of spending money smarter, it's a question of building a city smarter. So this is why I'm so excited about the official plan review, is those kinds of decisions that we make. I'll give you an example. In the existing official plan, the city sets aspirational targets for affordability, that 25% of new rental units are affordable to people at the 30th income percentile, 25% of home ownership units are affordable to people at the 40th income percentile. Those are modest targets. We're talking about households between $55,000 and $70,000 a year of annual income, but hasn't had the actual power to do anything about those aspirational targets. Inclusionary zoning is an opportunity to do that. Where we're talking about intensification, we're talking about upzoning. When we upzone a property, we're literally creating value out of that property out of thin air. So what can the city do in exchange with those private owners to try and reap some of its goals around housing affordability? There are lots of exchanges there that don't necessarily take city funding or city grants to take advantage of. So when we start looking at housing affordability for multiple income segments, we say, okay, well, very low incomes, yes, we need funding, we need nonprofit housing. Modest incomes, maybe good planning decisions would do the trick. Middle incomes, how do we avoid the kind of problems that Toronto and Vancouver are facing now? Well, we've only got Ottawa-sized problems. We don't want to have Toronto and Vancouver-sized problems. So good planning, good citywide thinking, applying ourselves to the affordable housing problem, I think is going to go a long way.
And Councillor Vice Chair Tierney?
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And great presentation, by the way. And I think you're hearing a lot of people participating in the discussion. And I love the talk around inclusionary zoning. But just to get back to when you were talking about Councillor Chiarelli answering his question, I didn't really hear the answer. So if, for example, you had the opportunity of 10 houses in wonderful downtown Barrhaven, 2 kilometers from transit, versus 7 downtown or directly on a transit station. Is there a preference about getting more units and getting people into them, or is it? I understand the economies of scale and looking at the additional items you would have to have, but I'm just looking from yourself and your group, what would they prefer? Pretend you're sitting around this table.
Yeah, affordable housing close to transit is what would be preferred, because that ultimately is what is going to keep living costs lower for those modest income households.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I know you've done a lot of work in terms of making affordable housing possible in our community, and obviously we've got a lot to work on in the future. My question has been about the gender lens, and I'm just asking you from your personal experience in terms of working in this field, what you've observed and how we can do better on that, just in your experience.
I also have the honor of chairing the board of directors of the Ottawa Social Housing Registry, which is the independent nonprofit that manages the centralized waiting list on behalf of the city. And when we look at the statistics on the social housing waiting list, we see obviously how poverty and housing affordability affects women differently. And there is a large difference in terms of women versus men applying to the waiting list. Particularly, you could see the effect of single-parent families, female-led single-parent families on the waiting list. So yes, it is very much a gender issue, and I think we need to take that into consideration in our planning.
And lastly, Councillor Duda.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative, as well as the people who had come before you. I have a question. We talk about affordable housing. There's a wide variation on what affordable is. My question is, what is the level that you think, what is that affordable housing that the City of Ottawa needs most? If we were to direct funding, what is it that we're really, really lacking in? And then how do we start addressing those other levels as we go?
And the question around housing affordability is always affordable to whom? And that's what it really comes down to. But the thing is, there is one housing market. You know, whether it's households on the lower end of the income spectrum or households on the higher income spectrum, it is one market. So there's a lot of pressure right now on apartments, rental apartments that are in the middle of the range. You've got people who can't afford those apartments trying to find them, and you've got people who could afford a lot more but are looking for good value in their housing dollars. So even if the city were to create policies or planning tools that would increase the supply of rental housing at the middle end of the market, that is going to help people as well on the lower end of the market. But there are those for whom their incomes just have them priced right out of the market. And that's why there's always an important role for nonprofit and co-op housing to make sure that people who can't even afford modest average market rents still have good quality, safe places to live. So the city's strategy has to look at both of those things. People who are priced out of the market, and the answers there are often nonprofit and co-op housing, but also creating a greater supply of rental housing in the middle end of the market.
So that leads into my follow-up question, in that we hear there's a lot of conversation about inclusionary zoning, and that has a lot of opportunities attached to it. My only question is, we've been talking about transit-oriented development, we're talking about putting people close to amenities. Are you advocating, or do you have a thought in respect to, does inclusionary zoning apply to all new developments? Because some of them are very far-flung. I mean, we could look for some of our suburban communities. Is that the best place to have 25%?
So I guess the question to ask is, are there communities where we don't want a diversity of incomes? And my answer is automatically going to be no. And when we're talking about inclusionary zoning, we're talking about middle, modest market affordability. If it was a rental development, it would be around average market rent. If it was an ownership development, it would be around average prices. So you're not getting to lower income levels, you're getting to modest and middle incomes. And I can't imagine a community in the city that should not include homes that a teacher or a firefighter or a public servant starting their career could afford.
No, and I appreciate that, and I don't think anybody is speaking to that. I think it's more so just we want people to have access to those complete communities that we are speaking about, and we're still building those. I was just curious as to whether, as we're kind of transitioning towards that, vision of our future, should we really be focusing on specific areas of our city more so when we're speaking about inclusionary zoning?
I think inclusionary zoning is one of the tools, but when we're looking at prioritizing affordable housing around transit, we want to use additional tools to get to more deeper levels of affordability as well. So that's where making land available and ensuring that there's funding for nonprofit affordable housing development becomes important.
Mr. Ellis, I don't know whether you were paying attention that closely, but I know the plan is to work on inclusionary zoning along transit-oriented development.
So, Chair, two significant points. One is that we will be bringing a report to FEDCO as a result of the work of the Interdepartmental Task Force on Transit Near Affordable Housing, which involves staff from Community Social Services, Planning, Real Estate, and Transportation. That report is to go to the March FEDCO meeting, so that addresses that one point. That relates to land. And then in our work program, which we're presenting to Planning Committee later this month, we will be providing the inclusionary zoning piece as part of this year's work plan, provided the Council adopts our budget.
Thanks very much for coming out. We have two more speakers, Andrea Balfour, sitting for Cowie. Andrea? And is Giselle Bouvier here? Okay, you're next and last.
Good morning.
You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
OK, thank you. Membre du Conseil municipal, merci d'avoir reçu cette députation aujourd'hui. Je m'appelle Andrea Balfour. I'm on the board of City for All Women's Initiative, Cowie, and I'm here speaking on behalf of our Women Reducing Poverty Together, Mamaway division, a network of women's organizations working to reduce women's poverty in our city. In the community research that we've conducted, we've determined the lack of deeply affordable housing being the key reason why women in Ottawa are finding themselves in poverty. The violence against women's shelters who are part of our network are finding that women are returning to abusive relationships as shelters are full and there's no place to go. This is due in part to the fact that women living in violence against women's shelters are unable to find affordable housing, so those beds are not freed up for other women seeking shelter. For all these reasons, we are very pleased with the $15 million in the draft city budget, which is dedicated to capital funding of affordable housing. Additionally, we know that there are increasing number of families in other shelters, many of whom are immigrant families. What we don't know is how many of them are single mothers struggling to make ends meet. We need to have a more clear, gender disaggregated statistic on homelessness of a diversity of women in comparison to men who have for us to have a full picture. We hope that in the future, with the Women and Gender Equity Strategy, such statistics will be made available to us, to the general public. We do know that for housing to work for many women, it needs to be safe, with supports, and located where there is access, as you've heard, to transit, grocery stores, social services, to name a few. This connectivity is key, especially in meeting the needs of a family. For these reasons, we urge you to support steps being taken by the city to identify land near transit where affordable housing will be built. We cannot allow for those who need transit most to be pushed away from our new transit system as condos are being built. As a single mother who juggles many tasks in caring for my youngest daughter, I understand how stressful it can be when, for many others as well, you have to choose between, for instance, food or transit or paying your rent. This is knowledge as well that I've gained via my interaction with many residents, via my civic engagement. Finally, given both the depth of the housing crisis, we ask that you do all possible to ensure that the building of this new affordable housing moves quickly. We know that $15 million is only a small portion of funds needed. The organizations participating in the Women Reducing Poverty Together, MOMAWay, we are already calling on elected officials at the provincial level and federal level, and we're willing to contribute. We want to know what they're willing to contribute from their part to address Ottawa's housing crisis. Please note, you can count on us for support. We're here to rally with you and all city council members. And merci d'avoir reçu notre députation ici aujourd'hui.
Hang on a second. Councillor Kavanagh has a question.
Absolutely.
I want to thank you very much for coming out today and making this presentation. You hit upon something that's very important in terms of the official plan and just going forward on gender equity and women's issues, and that is about collecting information. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to look at that in terms of where we are right now, in terms of how we want to make it better. Do you have any suggestions from Cowie right now in terms of where we should be looking particularly? Because if we're going to make things better, we should know where we're starting from.
Absolutely. I can tell you right away that the division Making Voices Count, that division of Cowie, we have a civic engagement table that meets. We have things already outlined that we'd love to share with members of council with regards to going forward, let you guys have a better idea as to what I facilitate to residents all around the city. So I'm meeting with women, men, on a regular basis. They're voicing their needs to me personally, and I'm here definitely with respect to representing them. With going forward with a gender issue, I have statistics. I didn't think that we'd have to get into it, but you yourself have statistics on your website with regards to what's going on with the housing needs, with what's going on with regards to the women's shelters. We've done up, and I don't know if you've already had the opportunity to take a look at this, Advancing Gender Equity in the City of Ottawa. Take a look at that. That will give you a quick glimpse as to what's needed. with regards to the women in violence at risk in Ottawa, we've got solutions we can discuss with you. We've got interim solutions. We've got the barriers. We've got opportunities. We know what documents are needed with regards to emergency shelters. We know the statistics here, and just knowing the statistics, and forgive me, not all the statistics are here, because not everything is documented. When the City of Ottawa gets a phone call and somebody's looking for a shelter, if that person is turned over to XYZ and it hasn't been documented by the city, you don't know where that person may have fallen through the cracks. In order for you to accumulate proper documentation, then you have to structure yourselves within the city.
Thank you. I just want to bring us back to the fact that this is the budget. I know. You're probably going to come and speak to Community and Protective Services. That's something that...
It's something there, too?
Also,
okay.
I think that Councillor Kavanagh has agreed during this meeting today, and probably she planned on doing it anyways, to bring together all the people that will be engaged in this conversation, and I think that's a good place to be having that conversation.
Okay. Well, then I definitely...
Kavanagh?
I definitely welcome the invite to sit down and discuss further.
In fact, I'm sure that Councillor Kavanagh is going to ask our committee coordinator, Melody Duffany, to provide that contact information.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much for hearing.
Thank you.
Okay. And I just want to say one quick thing. My heart's with Councillor Leeper. I found out late last night.
You wouldn't want to see the picture that devil just sent me. Anyway, I'm not kidding. I'm not showing you either. We have one more speaker, so come up and have the seat, Giselle, but I'm going to let my colleague who has to leave for a meeting, Councillor Hubley, ask the question that he had. He was first on the list anyway.
Thank you, Madam Chair, but you may want to elaborate a bit on that last statement before I ask my question. What kind of picture did Councillor Leeper send?
I'll show you after if you promise not to tell anybody.
Thank you. I apologize. I do have to leave. I just want to ask two quick questions on the budget piece, two questions of staff. One is the state of the reserves. Are we this year putting more money in reserves as we typically do than we're taking out, or are we raiding our reserves?
Repeat the question, sorry.
Pardon me?
Could you repeat the question?
Repeat the question. The state of the reserves. I ask this every year at budget time. Are we putting more money in the reserves than we are taking out?
So this year, we're projecting the reserves dropping slightly, but that's primarily because of the transit reserve. We've been putting money aside as Stage 1 completes, and knowing that we're going to have large amounts to pay out as part of substantial completion and revenue source availability. So overall, it's staying fairly stable, except for that piece of it.
Okay, and last year we talked about doing a review of some of the reserves to make sure we didn't have too much in the reserves. Have we accomplished that?
No, we have not.
We have not. Is there an update on it? You hope to be done this year?
Well, part of the funding for the housing has drawn down the tax stabilization. We are slowly building up the citywide capital reserve, but the tax stabilization reserve has been decreasing.
Okay, and my final question to you is on page 23 of the budget document, we talk about gateway features and gateway feature maintenance fund, and I'm just curious as to what that's about, because I thought we had gotten out of the gateway business.
Sorry.
Page 23 of the 2019 draft budget, PC condensed English PDF is where I got it from.
So Mr. Curry can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is a legacy maintenance fee that we collect from previously installed installations that we're committed to maintain under contract. So this is the updated fee this year for what it is, and actually it shows no change in the fee.
Okay, so it's a legacy.
It's a legacy item. Mr. Curry saying I'm correct.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Giselle Bouvier, last speaker.
Yes, well, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Giselle Bouvier, and I am a member of ACORN. ACORN is a local and national independent, not-for-profit, member-driven organization made up of low and moderate-income families and individuals who are active in fighting for social and economic justice. We are independent because we do not rely on corporate or government contributions. Our members pay membership dues, and this allows us to vote for our local representatives and decide the campaigns we work on, such as disability rights, payday lending, internet access for all, and affordable and healthy housing for all. ACORN and 6 other organizations, City for All Women's Initiative, Making Voices Count, the Alliance to End Homelessness Ottawa, the Healthy Transportation Coalition, CCOC, Ottawa District Labour Council, and the Coalition of Community Health and Resource Centres, united, to start a campaign on affordable housing near rapid transit. We held a rally in front of City Hall last week, right before the presentation of the city's draft budget. To date, over 70 organizations have endorsed our campaign, and over 1,600 individuals have signed a petition for affordable housing near rapid transit. The first demand of our campaign for affordable housing near rapid transit called on City Council to invest at least $12 million over and above federal and provincial grants in the 2019 city budget. We were surprised to hear the city could be contributing $15 million for affordable housing. This is a huge victory, and we're very happy to see that you've gone beyond even what we asked for. But we know this won't solve the whole problem. At the rally, we heard the lived experiences of a woman who has spent 4 months now in a 10-by-40 motel room with her kids. We heard how the kids did not even have space to play. And a woman on ODSP who received a notice her rent could be going up. She suffers high blood pressure, and this did not help her. Another woman last year who has been in a motel room for over 5 years. There are over 10,000 people waiting for social housing. There are 45,000 households in Ottawa who are in core housing need, which means they pay over 30% of their income on housing. This means they have to make sacrifices at varying degrees. In some cases, it is a question of cutting down on any or all of these expenses: food, clothes, medicine, transit, phone. If you look at the banner we have at the rally, it's on the screen over there, you will see there are 45 houses. Each house represents 1,000 households in unaffordable housing. I was hoping to color in each house whenever 1,000 units were created. With $15 million, I could not even color one house. If you look at that, I can't color one house, and there's 45 of them. That's a daunting challenge. Ottawa needs more than one-time influx of money. We need a commitment to have a recurring amount each year dedicated to affordable housing. Low-income people cannot afford a car, and all the expenses tied to that ownership. They need access to close-by, efficient transit. This is why our campaign for affordable housing near rapid transit also calls on City Council to, and you've heard it several times from other members of the group, pass a strong citywide inclusionary zoning bylaw that ensures 25% of new development is dedicated to affordable housing and places a special emphasis on deeply affordable housing within a kilometer of rapid transit stations. Ensure that all available government-owned land within 1 kilometer of current and future rapid transit stations is used for nonprofit and co-op housing. Create a 2019-2022 term of council priority that integrates transit and planning with clear affordable housing targets. So I thank you for providing ACORN this opportunity to present these demands, and we hope you will all vote in favor of this first $15 million and for ongoing future investments in affordable housing, and work this term to provide safe, affordable, healthy housing close to rapid transit.
Thank you, Ms. Bouvier. Thank you for coming out today. Okay. So, do we have any technical amendments on this? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just a couple of quick technical
You have a question?
amendments.
Okay, let's go right to questions then. No, let's go to questions because I'm thinking now maybe I should have stopped for lunch or something. Okay, good. Anybody else with questions about clearly affordable housing or the budget? Yes, Councillor Bernard.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair. So my question is actually around one of the budget line items, the material and services budget line item. And the reason I'm asking this is that I've been going through the budget binder, and I used to do this at the school board, but there's often times where there's padding there on the material and services side. And it's happening throughout the budget from what I can see. And so in this under PIDE's budget, this particular one falls, like I said, under material and services. I'm just wondering, there's been an increase this year over what's been spent in the past. So I looked at the 2017 budget, the 2018 budget, and now this budget, and we're not spending close to what we're putting into the budget this year for 2019 for materials and services. In specific, to be specific, page 51, the long-range planning budget, we're budgeting $626,000 for materials and services. Previously, this has come in around $300,000. I think we're on track for around $300,000 this year. And this is happening in every single tab that I've gone through in the budget. The materials and services, there's a bit of extra padding there. So I'm just wondering, what extra, why are we almost doubling that line item? Is there an explanation for it?
So, Madam Chair, that specific line item, the $250,000, is the money going to the Building Better Revitalized Neighborhoods one-time expenditure account. Finance has slotted it into that line, but that is actually entirely devoted to that project.
Okay, that's helpful. I think, is that detailed in the budget too? Is there somewhere where I could see this is what it is? Because it's happening all over the place. So.
Yeah, so on page 52, on the next page, each one of those operating budgets has explanatory notes, and those details are all there.
Okay, I'll be raising this at other committees as well. I just want to make sure we're targeting it. Even with the $250,000, we're actually over what we've been spending before. So it should be more like $300,000 based on what I've seen. So we're still overspending from what I can tell, or over budgeting, I guess, on those line items. And again, there's several throughout the budget. So it's just one. It's been interesting researching it, but even with the $250,000, we're going above and beyond what was there before.
Madam Chair, if I may respond to that, I must say that we have, over the last number of years, cut substantially in that area. And so the area that the budget deals with long-range planning is dramatically deteriorated its budget for additional outside services. And those materials are also materials used for public consultations, engagement, when we have to provide translation services for some of the materials we produce. That budget has actually been deteriorated considerably over time. And if Mr. Smith were still here, he would tell you he's at a point where that budget is about as low as it can go, because we have used cutting that budget in the past to achieve other tax objectives Council has set.
Okay, I'm just looking at the actual numbers the actuals are what we're predicting to come in for 2018, or is that what came in for 2018?
So for that particular one, long-range planning, the forecast for 2018 is $277,000, but the budget was $376, so they're underspending.
Right. So there was an overspend, or there was an underspend of $100,000.
They made reductions.
Right.
Yeah.
So I understand it's important. It's an important line item, but if we're not spending what we're allocating there in the first place, I just want to say, and it's not, I don't want to pick on this particular long-range planning piece. It's just a trend I'm noticing across several of the pages. I'm going to send you a note as well, just to indicate where these are happening. And I get it's an important line item. You don't want to cut something that's important, but the spend on it is I think, a little bit of a variance. So The other question I had was around the affordable housing one-time contribution. Out of the $15 million, how much is actually one-time contribution versus continuation of funds?
Madam Chair, so if you look up at the screen over here in the corner, so right now, $5.5 million is a one-time contribution. $1 million of that is going to be an annual contribution to the reserves. If you look towards the bottom where you see the $5 million, you see our land sales. So our land sales, those reserves in our development charge account, those replenish annually. So right now it's $5.5 million. That is the one-time piece.
So out of the $15 million, only $5.5 million is one time?
Well, the $5 million is one time for this year. However, what I'm trying to indicate is that those accounts will continue to replenish. So the $5 million out of the development charge account and out of our reserves is also one time for this year, but those accounts will continue to accumulate funding in them.
Right. Okay, but we may have different priorities in the next year that those reserves may go to rather than this, but we shouldn't, but that may be the case. Okay, so if I add those in, it's about what, $4 million, $3 million, that's continued funding, or is all of it one-time funding?
So out of the $15 million, $1 million is the ongoing piece. The balance is one-time money.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Do we have any motions associated with the budget? I think so. Yeah, we do. I saw them.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Therefore, it be resolved that the Planning Committee adopt the attached amendments, pages 21 and 22 of the draft 2019 Planning Committee Budget Book, which reflects the site plan control process and fees report. Be it further resolved that the Planning Committee direct finance staff to prepare a further revised site plan control fee schedule to be adopted by committee of the whole on March 6, 2019, as part of the roadmap motion, which reflects the amendments of the site plan control process and the fees review report approved by the Planning Committee and Council.
Is that amendment carried? So then on the item on the budget as amended, carried. Thank you very much for conversation. Okay. So lastly, we're going to, I think, notices of motion. Am I correct? Are we good? Okay. Notice of motion, and it is the notice of motion is Councillor Judas.
Should I read that out?
Yes.
Okay,
please.
So I'm very excited about this notice of motion, by the way. So this is a notice of my excitement of this motion. So moved by myself. Whereas the RCMP has developed a campus master plan with short-term 10-year and long-term 25-year planning and development objectives, and whereas the National Capital Commission has issued a federal land use approval to permit this expansion, including the construction of 2 new buildings, and whereas once fully developed, the site will accommodate 3,000 employees, a significant increase from the current 850, and whereas the proponents wish to obtain building permits and inspections from the city, and whereas there's a need for the city to bring its official plan and zoning bylaw into alignment with the federal land use plans and approvals, be it resolved that Planning Committee recommend Council approved that the Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Department be directed to bring forward to Planning Committee, in accordance with the notice requirements of the Planning Act, city-initiated official plan and zoning bylaw amendments to align the city's official plan and zoning bylaw with the Federal Campus Master Plan 2015 and the NCC Federal Land Use Approval 2016 for the RCMP site at 1426 St. Joseph Boulevard.
So that's a notice of motion. We'll deal with it on the 28th of February, and that is good news, and congratulations to everybody that's been involved in that. Okay. Any inquiries? None? Any new business? None? Goodbye. See you on the 28th. It's going to be a big agenda, and I would ask you to keep that into account. We're at bare quorum right now. Thank you. Yeah. Well, hey, you know what? If I had time, like if I wasn't looking after